Blood splattered across Sarah Thompson's face as Duke's massive body slammed between her and the striking copperhead. The German shepherd's teeth clamped around the snake's head with military precision, his wounded body trembling as venom pumped into his system. Her parents' screams seemed distant, underwater. 3 weeks earlier, Robert Thompson had nearly driven past the dying dog on that muddy Tennessee backroad. Martha's trembling fingers dialed the veterinarian as Robert carried the convulsing shepherd to their car, his weathered face streaked with tears for the first time since Sarah's accident. Through her own sobs, Sarah clutched Duke's blood-matted fur. "Please don't leave me too," she whispered. "Not after everything." How could a broken family and a discarded military dog, two damaged souls meeting by chance, possibly save each other? The answer would challenge everything the Thompsons believed about loyalty, healing, and the mysterious bonds that form when we're at our most vulnerable. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Thompson family car crawled along Interstate 40 toward rural Tennessee, the silence inside as heavy as the spring humidity outside. Robert's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel each time he checked their dwindling bank account balance on his phone. 30 years at Riverside Manufacturing had earned him nothing but a laminated certificate of service and a severance package that wouldn't last through summer. The foreclosure notice had arrived yesterday. Final warning, bold red letters. In the passenger seat, Martha stared out the window, mentally calculating how many more nights they could afford the rental cabin. After 3 decades of marriage, conversation had dwindled to logistics and necessities. Her nursing career sacrificed to raise Sarah, Martha now felt adrift in a house too quiet, with a husband too distant. She'd suggested this weekend getaway as a last-ditch effort to reconnect before discussing separation. From the back seat, 17-year-old Sarah watched raindrops race down the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. The anniversary of the accident loomed just 2 weeks away. 1 year since the crash that took Melissa but spared Sarah. 1 year of wondering why she survived when her best friend didn't. The antidepressants in her backpack hadn't stopped the nightmares or the crushing weight that made getting out of bed each morning an act of courage. "Should be another hour," Robert announced to no one in particular. The radio played an oldies station, neutral territory that required no conversation. The forecast had promised clear skies, but Tennessee weather had its own ideas. Rain pelted the windshield as they exited the interstate toward the rental cabin outside Oak Ridge. When Robert's phone lost signal, Martha silently unfolded the paper map from the glove compartment. They hadn't needed to work together like this in months. "Turn left at the fork," Martha instructed, her finger tracing the rural route. "The rental company said these back roads flood easily." Robert grunted acknowledgement, slowing as they navigated the muddy path. Through the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of Sarah actually looking at the scenery instead of her phone, the first sign of interest she'd shown in anything for weeks. The cabin was supposed to be where they'd honeymooned 34 years ago, though Martha suspected Robert had forgotten. She remembered the porch swing where they'd planned their future, counting stars and promising forever. Now they were returning with that future in tatters, hopes as weathered as the cabin would surely be. "Do you think there's cell service at the cabin?" Sarah asked, her first voluntary words of the trip. "We're going there to disconnect, honey," Martha replied, trying to hide her surprise at the engagement. "I might need to call Dr. Wilson," Sarah mumbled, referring to her therapist. The GPS announced signal lost as they turned onto a narrow road carved between towering oaks. Robert slowed to navigate around potholes filled with muddy water, the family sedan not built for country driving. None of them knew that the real purpose of their journey was about to reveal itself, not in the cabin that lay ahead, but on the side of this forgotten road. Robert slammed on the brakes, sending the sedan into a controlled skid on the muddy road. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, peering through the rain-streaked windshield. "What is it?" Martha leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Something on the roadside." Robert pointed toward a dark mass partially hidden in the tall grass. "Probably a deer hit by a truck." Sarah pressed her face against the back window, suddenly alert. "Dad, stop the car. We need to check." "Honey, it's pouring rain, and whatever it is, it's probably long gone." Robert checked his watch, calculating the remaining daylight. "Please." Something in Sarah's voice, a spark of emotion they hadn't heard in months, made both parents turn. Robert sighed, pulling the car onto the shoulder. "I'll take a quick look. Everyone else stay put." The moment he stepped out, the Tennessee spring rain soaked through his jacket. He trudged toward the shape in the grass, expecting to find roadkill. Instead, he froze. It was a dog, a large German shepherd, its black and tan coat matted with mud and blood. As Robert approached, the animal's eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling intelligence despite its clearly dire condition. Robert was about to turn away when the car door slammed behind him. Sarah splashed through puddles toward him, ignoring the rain. "Sarah, get back in the car," he called. But she was already kneeling beside the shepherd. "He's alive," she gasped, gently touching the dog's head. The shepherd's tail twitched weakly in response. "Dad, we have to help him. Honey, we can't leave him here to die." Her voice cracked with an emotion that had been absent since the accident. "I won't." Martha joined them, nursing instincts kicking in as she assessed the dog. "Multiple lacerations, possible internal injuries. He's in shock." She looked up at the darkening sky. "Robert, if we're going to do something, it needs to be now." Robert ran a hand through his wet hair, calculating costs they couldn't afford, complications they didn't need. But the look in his daughter's eyes stopped his objections cold. For months, Sarah had been a ghost, moving through life without truly participating. Now, kneeling in the mud beside a dying animal, she looked alive again. "Fine. Let's get him in the car." It took all three of them to move the shepherd. Robert estimated he weighed at least 80 pounds, even in his emaciated state. The dog whimpered once when they lifted him, but otherwise remained eerily still, as if conserving what little energy he had left. "Put my raincoat on the back seat," Martha instructed, her nurse's training evident in her calm efficiency. "Sarah, slide in first, then we'll place him with his head in your lap." Sarah didn't hesitate, positioning herself to receive the injured animal. As they settled the dog beside her, he opened his eyes again, looking directly at her with an uncanny focus, before relaxing against her. "He knows we're helping," Sarah whispered, carefully stroking the less injured parts of his coat. Robert closed the door and returned to the driver's seat, water dripping from his clothes onto the upholstery. "Now what? We're miles from anywhere." Martha pulled out her phone. "No signal. The rental company mentioned a small town nearby, Oak Ridge. Maybe someone there can direct us to a vet." The shepherd's breathing seemed labored, each inhale a deliberate effort. In the rear-view mirror, Robert watched his daughter bend close to the dog's ear, whispering words of encouragement he couldn't hear. It was the most engaged he'd seen her since before the accident. They drove slowly through the intensifying rain, the windshield wipers barely keeping up. After 15 minutes of navigating increasingly muddy roads, the scattered lights of Oak Ridge appeared ahead. The town was little more than a main street with a general store, a gas station, and a handful of houses. Robert pulled up to the general store, its windows glowing warmly against the gray afternoon. "I'll ask inside," he said. But before he could open his door, the store's screen door banged open. An older man in overalls stepped onto the porch, eyeing their out-of-state plates suspiciously. Robert rolled down his window. "Excuse me, sir. We found an injured dog on the road. Is there a veterinarian nearby?" The man approached slowly, peering into the back seat where Sarah cradled the shepherd's head. His expression softened slightly. "Nearest animal doctor is in Knoxville. Good 40 minutes in this weather." He leaned closer, examining the dog. "That's a military working dog. Or I'll eat my hat. See that scar pattern?" "Special Forces trained." "How can you tell?" Martha asked. "Served with K-9 units in Desert Storm. You don't forget what those dogs look like." He straightened up, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "Dog like that won't make it to Knoxville. But Eleanor Jenkins might help you." "Eleanor Jenkins," Robert repeated. "Lives about 3 miles up Hickory Lane. Used to be a veterinarian before she went." He twirled a finger near his temple. "A bit peculiar. Started mixing regular medicine with her herbal remedies and whatnot. But she's got a way with animals, especially working dogs." Martha and Robert exchanged doubtful glances. "Please," Sarah's voice came from the back seat, thick with emotion. "He's getting worse." The storekeeper nodded toward a dirt road heading east. "Follow that till you hit a fork. Take the right. Look for the mailbox with sunflowers painted on it. Can't miss it." Robert thanked him and pulled back onto the road. "A country herb doctor." "Really? We don't have many options," Martha replied, watching the dog's condition deteriorate in the back seat. "And Sarah's right. He's getting worse." The shepherd had begun trembling, his breathing increasingly shallow. When he suddenly vomited a small amount of blood onto the raincoat, Sarah looked up in panic. "Dad, hurry, please hurry." Robert pressed the gas, feeling the sedan slip slightly on the mud. The fork appeared as promised, and they turned right onto an even narrower path bordered by ancient oak trees. The rain had slackened to a drizzle, but water still dripped from the canopy above. "There," Martha pointed to a rustic mailbox decorated with fading sunflower paintings. Beyond it, a gravel driveway led to a small cabin nestled among towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the windows glowed amber against the approaching dusk. As they pulled up, the cabin door opened. A tall, slender woman with silver hair tied in a practical braid stood on the porch. Despite the surprised visitors, she showed no sign of alarm, as if she'd been expecting them. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Robert called, stepping out of the car. "It's just Eleanor," she replied, her voice surprisingly strong for a woman who appeared to be in her 70s. Her sharp blue eyes took in the situation at a glance. "Bring the dog inside." Without waiting for a response, she disappeared back into the cabin. Robert and Martha shared another look of uncertainty. "Can we trust her?" Martha whispered. From the back seat, Sarah spoke with unexpected firmness. "We don't have a choice." Robert nodded and opened the rear door. Together they carefully extracted the shepherd, who had grown alarmingly still. Sarah kept her hand on his head as Robert carried him toward the cabin, following in Eleanor's footsteps. The interior smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something medicinal. Bundles of plants hung from the rafters, and the walls were lined with bookshelves containing an eclectic mix of modern medical texts and worn leather-bound volumes. "Put him here," Eleanor instructed, clearing a large wooden table by the window. As Robert laid the dog down, Eleanor's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs and examining wounds. "What happened?" she asked, not looking up from her examination. "We found him on the side of the road," Martha explained. "We think he might have been hit by a car." Eleanor's fingers paused over a particular wound on the dog's side. "This isn't a road accident. This is a gunshot wound, partially healed." She continued her assessment, gently probing the shepherd's abdomen. "And he's got internal bleeding, probably from trauma several days ago. He's been walking wounded for some time." Sarah hovered at the edge of the table, unwilling to move far from the dog. "Can you help him?" Eleanor looked up, truly seeing the girl for the first time. Something passed between them, a recognition that made Robert uneasy. The older woman's gaze lingered on Sarah's face before returning to the dog. "I can try," Eleanor said finally, "but I'll need your help, all of you." Over the next hour, the Thompson family became unlikely assistants in Eleanor's makeshift surgery. She cleaned and treated the wounds with a combination of conventional medical supplies and herbal preparations. When the shepherd needed to be held still for a particularly painful procedure, it was Sarah's voice that calmed him, her hand on his head that kept him from flinching away from Eleanor's needle. "Remarkable," Eleanor murmured, watching the interaction. "He trusts you completely." Sarah didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. As night fell completely, Eleanor finally straightened up, wiping her hands on a towel. "I've done what I can. The next few hours will tell." "Will he make it?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "That depends on him," Eleanor replied, "and perhaps on you as well." When the family looked confused, she added, "Animals know when someone needs them. Sometimes they hold on because they sense they have a purpose." Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We should get to our rental cabin. It's getting late." Eleanor looked out the window at the darkness and the rain that had returned in force. "The creek will be over the low bridge by now. You won't make it to any rental tonight." She gestured to a door at the back of the room. "I have a spare room and a couch. You're welcome to stay until morning." Before Robert could object, Martha placed a hand on his arm. "That's very kind. Thank you." As Eleanor showed them to the spare room, Sarah refused to leave the shepherd's side. "I'll stay with him," she insisted, "in case he wakes up scared." Eleanor brought her a blanket and pillow without argument. "What will you call him?" she asked. Sarah looked surprised at the question. "We can't keep him." "Everyone needs a name," Eleanor said simply. Sarah studied the sleeping shepherd, his powerful frame incongruously vulnerable on the table. "Duke," she said finally. "He looks like a duke." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Duke it is, then." She handed Sarah a small bell. "Ring this if his breathing changes or if he wakes. I'll be nearby." As Eleanor left Sarah with the dog, she paused beside Robert and Martha. "That girl has lost something precious," she said quietly. "And that dog has too. Watch them carefully together." Robert wanted to ask what she meant, but Martha's warning squeeze on his arm stopped him. They had already accepted enough strangeness for one night. Tomorrow, they would thank this unusual woman, continue to their rental cabin, and figure out what to do about the dog, Duke, once he was stable. None of them could have predicted how Duke's presence would irrevocably change their lives, or that the greatest danger was yet to come. Sarah awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Weak morning light filtered through lace curtains, illuminating bundles of dried herbs hanging from rough-hewn ceiling beams. The events of yesterday came flooding back: the injured German shepherd, the strange woman's cabin, the makeshift surgery. She sat up quickly, looking toward the table where they'd left Duke. The table was empty. "Duke?" she called, panic rising in her throat. "He's here," came Eleanor's voice from the kitchen area. Sarah turned to see the older woman seated in a rocking chair, the shepherd lying on a quilt at her feet. To Sarah's astonishment, Duke's eyes were open, his tail thumping weakly against the floor as he recognized her. "He's awake!" Sarah hurried over, dropping to her knees beside him. Duke lifted his head slightly, his dark eyes fixed on her face. Eleanor smiled, the expression softening her weathered features. "He's a fighter, this one. Started coming around about dawn." Sarah gently stroked Duke's head, careful to avoid the wounds Eleanor had cleaned and dressed the night before. "Hey there," she whispered. "You scared us." "He'll need time to heal properly," Eleanor said, rising from her chair with surprising agility for her age. "But he's stronger than he looks." The bedroom door opened, and Martha emerged, tying her hair back in a loose ponytail. She stopped short when she saw Duke awake. "Well, that's unexpected," she said, moving closer to examine him with a nurse's critical eye. "His color is better." "Where's Dad?" Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off Duke. "Still sleeping?" Martha replied. "He was exhausted." Eleanor moved to the old cast-iron stove where a kettle was beginning to whistle. "Tea?" she offered, reaching for a jar filled with a blend of dried leaves. Martha hesitated briefly before nodding. "Thank you." As Eleanor prepared the tea, Sarah noticed how precisely she moved, with none of the hesitation or tremor one might expect from someone her age. Despite her silver hair and lined face, there was something distinctly formidable about Eleanor Jenkins. "You're not just an herbalist, are you?" Sarah asked suddenly. Eleanor paused, measuring leaves into a strainer. "What makes you say that?" Sarah gestured toward a shelf where modern medical textbooks sat alongside ancient-looking herbal compendiums. "Those aren't amateur books. And the way you treated Duke last night, that wasn't just home remedies." A smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Observant girl," she murmured. "No, I wasn't always." She gestured vaguely around the cabin. "This." Before she could elaborate, Robert's heavy footsteps announced his arrival. He appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled, expression guarded as he took in the scene. "The dog made it," he observed, sounding genuinely surprised. "Duke," Sarah corrected. "His name is Duke." Robert sighed, but didn't argue. He accepted a cup of tea from Eleanor with a nod of thanks. "We appreciate your help, Ms. Jenkins." "Eleanor," she corrected. "Eleanor," he amended, "but we should be getting to our rental cabin soon. Is there a vet in the area who could take Duke?" Sarah's head snapped up. "We can't just leave him." "Sarah, honey," Martha began gently. "Duke needs specialized care. We're not equipped to—" "I'll take care of him," Sarah insisted, her voice rising. "I'll do everything. Please." Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration familiar to both his wife and daughter. "We can't afford a dog right now, especially not one with medical issues." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Eleanor sipped her tea, watching the family dynamic with knowing eyes. "I've been thinking," she finally said, setting down her cup. "Duke needs at least a week of close monitoring before he can be moved safely. I could use some help around here, chopping wood, fixing that loose step on the porch. Perhaps you could stay, Mr. Thompson. Your rental cabin will still be there next weekend." Robert frowned. "That's very generous, but—" "We'd pay for our keep with work," Eleanor continued smoothly. "And I could use Martha's nursing experience with some of my regular patients." "Patients?" Martha raised an eyebrow. Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "Many people in these hills prefer my methods to the 2-hour drive to the nearest hospital. Nothing complicated, mostly chronic pain, arthritis, the occasional stitches." Robert and Martha exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that long-married couples perfect. Sarah held her breath, her hand resting protectively on Duke's shoulder. "We did pay for that cabin in advance," Robert said reluctantly. "I could call and explain," Martha offered. "See if they'll apply the deposit to next weekend instead." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her parents, especially her father, never deviated from a plan. The financial implications alone would normally be enough for an immediate rejection. "You're sure you have room for us?" Robert asked Eleanor. "The loft has 2 beds," Eleanor replied, "and Sarah seems content with her pallet near Duke." Robert sighed, outnumbered. "1 week," he conceded, "but we need to be back for my job interview on the 15th. Sarah felt a surge of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. Duke seemed to sense her emotion, nudging her hand with his nose despite his obvious pain. After breakfast, eggs and biscuits that Eleanor produced with surprising speed, Robert and Martha walked outside to call the rental company from the single spot on Eleanor's property that received cell signal. Sarah stayed with Duke, who had managed to drink some water and was now resting more comfortably on his quilt. "He was shot, wasn't he?" Sarah asked when she and Eleanor were alone. Eleanor's hands stilled on the dish she was washing. "Yes," she confirmed. "Not recently. That wound is partially healed, but something else injured him more recently. Internal damage consistent with a fall or blow." Sarah gently traced the outline of Duke's ear. "Who would shoot a dog like this?" "Someone afraid of what he represents, perhaps." Eleanor dried her hands and approached, kneeling with surprising grace beside Duke. She gently lifted one of his paws, showing Sarah a pattern of calluses. "These aren't ordinary dog calluses. See how they're distributed? He's been trained to traverse difficult terrain, to hold certain positions for long periods." Sarah looked closer. "What does that mean?" "It means Duke is special," Eleanor said simply. She reached for Duke's neck, carefully feeling under the matted fur. After a moment, her fingers found what they were seeking, a metal chain. With gentle movements, she worked it free, revealing a set of military-style dog tags. "I thought so," she murmured, studying the tags. "Military working dog, specialized training." She handed the tags to Sarah. The metal was warm in Sarah's palm. She read the engraved information. K97245 Duke, MWD, Handler, Capt. M. Jenkins. Sarah looked up sharply. "Jenkins? Like you?" A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. "My son, Michael." The screen door banged open as Robert and Martha returned. Eleanor quickly took the tags back from Sarah, slipping them into her pocket with a warning glance that clearly said, "Not now." "They'll refund half the deposit," Robert announced, clearly displeased. "Better than nothing, I suppose." Martha seemed less concerned about the money. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to check Duke's bandages. Nursing habit." "Be my guest," Eleanor replied, standing up. "Sarah, why don't you help me gather some herbs from the garden while your mother works? Duke will be fine." Reluctantly, Sarah followed Eleanor outside. The morning air was fresh after yesterday's rain, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Behind Eleanor's cabin stretched a meticulously maintained garden, divided into geometric sections filled with plants Sarah couldn't identify. "Your parents are worried about more than money," Eleanor said abruptly, handing Sarah a small basket. "They're worried about you getting attached to a dog who might not survive." Sarah stiffened. "He will survive." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, surprising her. "I believe he will. But that's not really what they're afraid of." "What do you mean?" Eleanor knelt to cut a sprig of rosemary. "They're afraid of what happens when you care about something again, after your loss." Sarah froze. "How do you know about that?" "I recognize the look," Eleanor said simply. "I've seen it in my mirror." She straightened, fixing Sarah with her penetrating blue gaze. "When did you lose your friend?" The question was so direct, so unexpected that Sarah answered before she could think to deflect. "Almost a year ago. Car accident. I was driving." Eleanor nodded as if confirming something. "And you survived." "I shouldn't have," Sarah whispered, the familiar guilt washing over her. Melissa had her whole future ahead of her. She was going to be a doctor. I was just there. "And now you feel you don't deserve to live," Eleanor stated rather than asked. "That's why you connected so immediately with Duke. You both survived when perhaps you shouldn't have." Sarah felt exposed, as if Eleanor had reached directly into her mind and extracted her most private thoughts. "You don't know anything about me," she said defensively. "I know survivors," Eleanor replied, her voice gentle but firm. "And I know healing when I see it beginning." She gestured back toward the cabin. That dog needed someone to fight for him when he couldn't fight anymore. So did you." Before Sarah could respond, a call came from the cabin. "Eleanor!" Martha's voice held an urgency that made both of them turn. They hurried back to find Martha kneeling beside Duke, whose body had gone rigid, trembling violently. "Seizure," Martha explained tersely. "Started just after you left." Eleanor moved with surprising speed, grabbing a vial from a nearby shelf. "Hold his head," she instructed Sarah. "Gently, just to prevent injury." Sarah knelt, cradling Duke's head as Eleanor administered something from the vial using a dropper. Robert stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the crisis unfolding. "Come on, boy," Eleanor murmured, her fingers working with practiced efficiency to check Duke's vital signs. "Fight through it." Gradually, the seizure subsided. Duke's body relaxed, his breathing returning to normal, though more labored than before. "What was that?" Martha asked, gesturing to the vial. "Anti-seizure compound," Eleanor replied. "Standard veterinary medicine with a few herbal additions to ease the transition." Martha looked skeptical. "You just happen to have veterinary anti-seizure medication on hand?" Eleanor's expression remained neutral. "I told you, I have a background in this field." "What field, exactly?" Robert asked from the doorway, his tone suggesting growing suspicion. Eleanor sighed, seeming to make a decision. She stood and walked to a trunk in the corner of the room. After a moment's hesitation, she unlocked it and removed a framed photograph, which she handed to Robert. Sarah couldn't see the image from her position beside Duke, but she watched her father's expression change from suspicion to surprise. "You were military?" he asked. "U.S. Army Veterinary Corps," Eleanor confirmed. "Specialized in working dogs, particularly those with traumatic injuries and PTSD. I retired as a lieutenant colonel." Martha joined her husband, looking at the photograph. "But why are you out here, living like a crazy herb woman?" Eleanor finished with a hint of amusement. "Because sometimes conventional medicine isn't enough. Sometimes healing requires something more intuitive." She glanced meaningfully at Duke, then at Sarah. "Sometimes souls need to find each other to heal properly." Robert handed the photograph back, looking uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Well, that explains your expertise with the dog." "Duke," Sarah corrected again, still stroking the shepherd's head soothingly. Eleanor returned the photograph to the trunk. "Duke will need careful monitoring after that seizure. It's not uncommon with head trauma, but we need to prevent another if possible." "I'll stay with him," Sarah volunteered immediately. Eleanor nodded. "Good. Robert, if you're still willing to help around the place, that porch step won't fix itself. And Martha, I could use your assistance organizing my supplies." As her parents followed Eleanor to their respective tasks, Sarah settled more comfortably beside Duke. His eyes had opened again, watching her with that same intense focus she'd noticed before. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. "We both are." Duke's tail thumped once against the floor, a gesture of acknowledgement that brought the first genuine smile to Sarah's face in nearly a year. Neither of them knew yet how their lives had become intertwined or the danger that still lay ahead. But in that moment, a connection formed, one that would ultimately save them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Throughout that first day at Eleanor's cabin, Sarah rarely left Duke's side. She helped Eleanor change his bandages, coaxed him to drink water, and even managed to get him to eat a little of the special broth Eleanor prepared. By evening, Duke was able to stand briefly, though his legs trembled with the effort. "Remarkable progress," Eleanor observed as she checked his wounds before dinner. "He's responding well to you." Sarah had been thinking about their earlier conversation in the garden. "You said Duke has PTSD. Can dogs really get that?" Eleanor nodded, her fingers gently probing Duke's healing injuries. Working dogs experience trauma just like soldiers do. They see the same horrors, face the same dangers. Duke shows classic signs: the hypervigilance, the way he scans doorways, his reaction to certain sounds. "Like me," Sarah said quietly. Eleanor's hands paused their work, her eyes meeting Sarah's. "Yes," she acknowledged. "Like you." The realization should have been uncomfortable, but instead, Sarah found it oddly comforting. There was something powerful in being understood, even if it was by a wounded animal. That night, as the family gathered around Eleanor's table for a simple but hearty stew, the conversation turned to Duke's future. "I've been thinking," Martha began carefully, "if Duke continues to improve, perhaps we could foster him until a permanent home is found." Sarah looked up hopefully. "Really?" Robert set down his spoon with deliberate care. "Martha, we've discussed this. Our situation doesn't allow for a pet right now, especially one with medical needs." "It would just be temporary," Martha pressed. "And Sarah has already shown she's willing to take responsibility for his care." Eleanor watched the exchange silently, her sharp eyes moving from one family member to another. "Dad, please," Sarah pleaded. "I'll get a job to help pay for his food. I'll do everything." Robert's expression softened slightly at his daughter's enthusiasm, the most animation he'd seen from her in months. Let's see how the week goes," he conceded reluctantly. "No promises." Later, as Robert stepped outside for some air, Eleanor joined him on the porch. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the surrounding forest. "Beautiful night," she commented, standing beside him at the railing. Robert nodded, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Mrs. Jenkins, Eleanor, I appreciate what you're doing for the dog." "Duke," she corrected with a small smile. Robert sighed. "Duke, but I'm concerned about Sarah getting too attached. When we leave here—" "You're worried about her heart breaking again," Eleanor finished for him. "After losing her friend." Robert turned to her, startled. "She told you about Melissa?" "Some," Eleanor admitted. "Enough to understand she carries a heavy burden of guilt." Robert looked back at the stars. The accident wasn't her fault. The other driver ran a red light, but Sarah— she can't forgive herself for surviving. "And you?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Have you forgiven yourself?" The question caught him off guard. For what? For not being able to protect her from pain. Robert's shoulders slumped, the carefully maintained facade of control cracking slightly. "I'm her father. I'm supposed to keep her safe." "From death, yes," Eleanor agreed, "but not from life, not from the connections that make life worth living, even when they carry the risk of loss." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "Why are you really afraid of Duke?" The directness of the question made Robert uncomfortable. "I told you. The expense, the responsibility—" "No," Eleanor interrupted gently. "The real reason—" Robert was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the chirping of crickets. "I had a German shepherd when I was a boy, Rex. He died trying to protect me from a neighbor's aggressive dog. I was 8. He swallowed hard. "I couldn't save him. I've never had another dog since." Eleanor nodded as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "So it's not just Sarah's heart you're protecting." Robert didn't deny it. "I should check if Martha needs help," he said, clearly uncomfortable with how much he'd revealed to this virtual stranger. As he turned to go, Eleanor spoke again. "Mr. Thompson, the most painful wounds are often the ones we refuse to reopen. But sometimes that's the only way they can finally heal." Robert paused at the door but didn't respond. As he went inside, Eleanor remained on the porch, her gaze turning toward the stars above. In the distance, an owl called, its lonely cry echoing through the trees, a sound both mournful and resolute, much like the path that lay ahead for the Thompson family. By the third day at Eleanor's cabin, Duke had made remarkable progress. The German Shepherd could now stand on his own for short periods and had begun to follow Sarah around the cabin, his movements stiff but determined. His appetite had returned with surprising vigor, and the haunted look in his eyes had begun to soften whenever Sarah was near. "I've never seen a dog heal this quickly," Martha remarked as she helped Eleanor organize her medicinal supplies. "Especially with those kinds of injuries." Eleanor measured dried chamomile into small paper packets. "Working dogs are bred for resilience, and Duke has something many injured animals don't." "What's that?" Martha asked. Eleanor nodded toward the main room where Sarah sat reading on the floor, Duke's massive head resting contentedly in her lap. "Purpose." Outside, Robert was finishing repairs on Eleanor's porch steps. The physical labor had been unexpectedly therapeutic, giving him a concrete problem to solve when so much of his life felt beyond his control. The foreclosure notice back home, the dwindling savings account, the failed job interviews, all temporarily held at bay by the simple act of hammer meeting nail. "Looks solid," Eleanor commented, stepping outside with 2 glasses of iced tea. Robert straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Should last you another decade at least." "Longer than I'll need it," Eleanor replied with a pragmatic acceptance that made Robert uncomfortable. She handed him a glass. "Your daughter seems happier today." Robert took a long drink before answering. "She does, but I'm concerned about what happens when we leave. 4 more days, and then life continues," Eleanor finished for him. "But perhaps differently than before." Before Robert could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, Duke at her heels. The transformation in both of them over just 3 days was striking. Sarah stood straighter, her face animated as she spoke. "Dad, Duke walked all the way around the cabin with me. No stumbling, even on the uneven ground." Robert couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "That's great, honey. Eleanor, is there somewhere nearby we could take him for a longer walk?" Sarah asked. "Just to build his strength?" Eleanor considered this. "There's a meadow about a 1/4 mile down the path behind the cabin. Flat ground. Good for rehabilitation. But," her expression grew serious, "keep him on a lead. We're in Copperhead country, especially this time of year. The spring floods drive them to higher ground." At the mention of snakes, Robert felt a familiar knot of anxiety. "Maybe we should wait another day or 2 before venturing that far." "I'll be careful," Sarah promised. "And Duke seems to be alert to everything. He even growled at that possum under the porch last night before we heard it." Eleanor nodded. "Military working dogs are trained to detect threats. If anything, Duke will be more cautious than most dogs, not less." Robert sighed, recognizing he was outnumbered. "Fine, but take my cell phone. There's a signal on the ridge if you need it." Sarah beamed, accepting the phone and slipping it into her pocket. Eleanor disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with a length of sturdy rope fashioned into a makeshift leash. "The creek crosses the path about halfway to the meadow," she instructed, handing the lead to Sarah. "It's shallow, but the rocks can be slippery. Take your time." As Sarah and Duke set off down the path, Robert watched them go with a mixture of pride and apprehension. His daughter looked almost like her old self, the Sarah from before the accident, before the weight of survivor's guilt had dimmed her spirit. "She'll be fine," Eleanor assured him, seeming to read his thoughts. "Duke won't let anything happen to her." "He's just a dog," Robert said, but without conviction. Eleanor's sharp blue eyes studied him. "Is he? Or is he something more to her? And perhaps to you as well, if you'd allow it?" Inside the cabin, Martha was examining the framed photographs Eleanor had placed on a small bookshelf. Most showed a handsome young man in military uniform, often accompanied by working dogs. In several, he stood proudly beside Eleanor, both in army dress uniforms. "Your son?" Martha asked when Eleanor returned. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. "Yes, Captain Michael Jenkins. Army Rangers, K-9 unit." Martha noted the past tense but didn't press. Instead, she picked up another photograph, this one showing Michael with a German Shepherd that looked remarkably similar to Duke. "Is this Duke?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "He was Michael's partner for 3 deployments." Martha's brow furrowed. "Then Duke is your son's dog? But why didn't you say something when we brought him in?" Eleanor carefully took the photograph from Martha, her weathered fingers tracing the outline of her son's face. "I wasn't certain at first. He was so injured, so changed. But when I found his tags, I knew." "Does Sarah know?" "Not yet," Eleanor admitted. "I wanted to be sure Duke would survive before explaining everything." Martha sat down, trying to process this revelation. "But how did Duke end up on that road, miles from anywhere?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "That's what I've been trying to understand." She hesitated before continuing. "Michael died 14 months ago. Training accident at Fort Benning. After the funeral, Duke was supposed to be reassigned or retired to me, but he disappeared from the base kennel. I've been searching for him ever since." "Disappeared?" Martha echoed. "You mean stolen?" "I believe so," Eleanor said grimly. "Working dogs like Duke are valuable, especially ones with specialized training. Someone took him, but what happened after that?" She shook her head. "The gunshot wound, the more recent injuries. Someone abused him, then either abandoned him or he escaped." Martha thought of the loyal shepherd who, despite his own injuries, never left Sarah's side. "That's horrible. Have you reported it to the military?" "Many times," Eleanor replied with a bitterness that suggested the responses had been unsatisfactory. "But without proof of who took him, there wasn't much they could do." "And now he's found his way back to you," Martha marveled. "What are the chances?" "Slimmer than you can imagine," Eleanor agreed. "Almost as if—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "As if what?" Eleanor's eyes drifted to the window, toward the path where Sarah and Duke had disappeared. "As if he was meant to find your daughter first." Meanwhile, Sarah and Duke made their way carefully along the forest path. Despite his injuries, Duke moved with increasing confidence, pausing occasionally to scent the air or investigate an interesting smell. The improvised leash remained slack between them, not because Duke pulled ahead, but because he seemed content to stay precisely at Sarah's side. "You're doing great," she encouraged as they reached the small creek Eleanor had mentioned. The water burbled cheerfully over smooth stones, no more than a few inches deep at its center. Duke approached the water cautiously, sniffing at the edge before stepping in. He waited for Sarah, watching to ensure she navigated the slippery rocks safely before continuing. "It's like you're taking care of me instead of the other way around," Sarah observed with a small laugh. The meadow, when they reached it, was everything Eleanor had promised, a sun-dappled clearing carpeted with spring wildflowers and soft grass. Sarah unhooked Duke's lead, allowing him to explore while she settled on a fallen log at the meadow's edge. For the first time in nearly a year, Sarah felt something close to peace. The constant replaying of the accident, the screeching tires, Melissa's scream, the shattering glass, had temporarily quieted. Here, with Duke moving steadily through the tall grass, his ears perked forward with interest, the weight of guilt seemed just a little lighter. Duke returned to her side, dropping down with a contented sigh. Sarah stroked his head, noticing how the tension had gradually left his powerful frame over the past days. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she murmured. "Both a little broken." Duke's warm brown eyes fixed on her face with an intelligence that sometimes startled her. His tail thumped against the ground in acknowledgement. "Melissa would have loved you," Sarah continued, finding it easier to speak about her friend here, in this peaceful place, with only Duke to hear. "She was always the brave one. I just followed along. That night," her throat tightened, "we were only going to the movies. Nothing special. And then that truck." Duke shifted, placing his head on her lap as if sensing her distress. "Everyone says it wasn't my fault. The other driver ran the red light, but if I'd reacted faster, if I'd seen him coming—" She wiped away a tear. "Why did I live when she didn't? It doesn't make sense." Duke whined softly, pressing closer. "But you understand, don't you?" Sarah whispered. "Something happened to you, too. Something bad. But you survived." The shepherd's eyes never left her face, steady and unblinking. "Maybe that's all we can do," Sarah continued. "Survive. And then figure out how to live with it." They stayed in the meadow for nearly an hour, Sarah talking more freely than she had since the accident, Duke listening with the uncomplicated acceptance that only animals can offer. When they finally started back toward the cabin, Sarah felt lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. As they approached the creek crossing, Duke suddenly stiffened. His ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" Sarah asked, instantly alert. Duke's focus was laser-sharp, directed at something in the underbrush near the creek. The hair along his spine stood on end as his growl intensified. Sarah peered at the area that had captured Duke's attention but saw nothing unusual. "It's okay, boy. Probably just a squirrel." She took a step forward, but Duke moved quickly to block her path, his body positioned protectively between Sarah and whatever he sensed in the brush. His posture was no longer that of an injured animal, but of a trained military dog, alert, focused, ready. "Duke, what—" The movement was so fast Sarah almost missed it. A sinuous shape sliding through the undergrowth at the creek's edge, a copperhead, its distinctive pattern momentarily visible before it disappeared into denser foliage. Sarah's heart pounded. The snake had been directly in their path, exactly where she would have stepped if Duke hadn't stopped her. "Good boy," she breathed, her hand shaking slightly as she reattached his lead. "Very good boy." Duke maintained his vigilant stance until they had given the area a wide berth, only relaxing once they were well past the potential danger. Even then, he stayed closer to Sarah's side than before, his senses clearly still on high alert. Back at the cabin, Eleanor was waiting on the porch, as if she'd somehow known they were returning. Her keen eyes took in Duke's protective positioning and Sarah's slightly pale face. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Duke spotted a copperhead by the creek," Sarah explained. "Stopped me before I could step near it." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Working dogs like Duke are trained to identify threats of all kinds: bombs, hostile individuals, dangerous animals. He was doing what he was trained to do. "Protecting me," Sarah said softly. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "That's what he does." Inside, Robert and Martha were preparing lunch, the domestic activity jarringly normal after Sarah's unsettling encounter. Sarah described what had happened, watching her father's face pale at the mention of the snake. "That's it," he declared. "No more walks in the woods." "Robert," Martha intervened, "Duke protected her." "She's fine." "This time," Robert insisted. "But I'm not risking—" "Dad," Sarah interrupted, a newfound firmness in her voice. "I'm going to keep walking Duke. He needs the exercise to get stronger and—" She hesitated. "I need it too." The determination in her expression caught Robert off guard. For so long after the accident, Sarah had merely acquiesced to whatever was decided for her, too wrapped in grief and guilt to assert her own needs. Now, standing in Eleanor's rustic kitchen with Duke at her side, she looked more like herself than she had in months. Robert glanced at Martha, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. "Fine," he conceded, "but not alone. Either your mother or I will go with you." It was a compromise Sarah could accept. "Okay." As they sat down to lunch, Eleanor placed a small envelope beside Sarah's plate. "I think it's time you knew more about Duke," she said simply. Sarah opened the envelope and slid out Duke's military identification tags along with a photograph. Her breath caught as she recognized Duke, younger and healthier, standing proudly beside a uniformed soldier who shared Eleanor's striking blue eyes. "His name is Duke?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. Eleanor nodded. "Yes. He wasn't just any military dog. He was a specialized service animal trained for multiple combat deployments." Her voice softened. "And he belonged to my son, Michael." Sarah looked up sharply. "Your son?" Eleanor's eyes held a mixture of sorrow and pride. "Captain Michael Jenkins, Army Rangers. He died 14 months ago in a training accident." The table fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. Sarah looked from the photograph to Duke, who had settled at her feet, his intelligent eyes watching the conversation with apparent understanding. "After Michael died," Eleanor continued, "Duke disappeared from the base kennels. I've been searching for him ever since. Until you found him on that road, I had no idea what had happened to him." "Someone took him?" Martha asked. Eleanor nodded grimly. "And mistreated him, based on his injuries. The gunshot wound suggests he may have escaped and been shot at. How he ended up on that rural road, miles from anywhere." She shook her head. "Only Duke knows that story." Sarah stared at the photograph, tracing Duke's image with her fingertip. "So he's your dog now," she said, a note of resignation in her voice. "Legally, yes," Eleanor acknowledged. "But Duke has chosen his own path." She gestured to the shepherd's position at Sarah's feet. "He's made his choice quite clear." "What are you saying?" Robert asked. Eleanor's gaze was steady. "I'm saying that Duke has formed a bond with Sarah that would be cruel to break. He's found a new purpose, one that my son would have approved of completely." "You want us to keep him?" Martha clarified, surprise evident in her voice. "I want what's best for Duke," Eleanor corrected. "And I believe that's with Sarah." Sarah hardly dared to hope. "Really? You'd let us?" "There would be conditions," Eleanor said firmly. "Duke needs ongoing care for his injuries. He has specific training needs to maintain his skills. And," she hesitated, "he carries his own trauma, just as Sarah does." Robert started to object, the financial concerns rising automatically to his lips. But Martha placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. "We would need to learn how to care for him properly," Martha said thoughtfully. "His medical needs, his training. I can teach you," Eleanor offered, "before you leave at the end of the week." Sarah looked at her father, her eyes pleading. "Dad, please. I know things are tight right now, but I'll get a job after school. I'll pay for everything Duke needs." Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen since before the accident. Hope. In just a few days, the wounded shepherd had accomplished what months of therapy and medication had failed to do. Sarah was engaging with life again, making plans for a future she had seemed indifferent to just days ago. "We'll figure something out," he said finally, his voice gruff with emotion. "But Duke is your responsibility, Sarah. Every day, not just when it's convenient." Sarah's face lit up with a smile so bright it made Martha's eyes fill with tears. "I promise. Thank you, Dad." As the conversation turned to practical matters, diet requirements, exercise needs, ongoing medical care, Sarah slipped her hand down to rest on Duke's solid shoulder. The shepherd leaned into her touch, his steady presence anchoring her in a way nothing had since the accident. Neither of them could know that their bond would soon be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, or that the worst danger was yet to come. For now, it was enough that two broken souls had found each other, the first step on a path toward healing that would ultimately save them both. That evening, as the sunset painted Eleanor's meadow in shades of gold and amber, Sarah sat on the porch steps with Duke beside her. The big shepherd was dozing, his head resting on his paws, but his ears still twitched at every sound from the surrounding forest. Eleanor joined her, settling into the rocking chair Robert had repaired that afternoon. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Your son," Sarah finally said. "What was he like?" A soft smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Stubborn, brilliant with animals, believed in doing what was right no matter how difficult." She glanced at Duke. He and Duke were inseparable from the moment they were paired. 3 combat tours together. Duke saved his life twice that I know of. "And now he's saving me," Sarah said quietly. Eleanor studied her with those piercing blue eyes. "Perhaps you're saving each other." The simple truth of those words settled over Sarah like a warm blanket. For the first time since the accident, she allowed herself to consider that her survival might not be a mistake or a cruel cosmic joke, that perhaps, like Duke, she had survived for a reason yet to be fully revealed. As if sensing her thoughts, Duke stirred, lifting his head to rest it on her knee. His brown eyes, once haunted with pain, now held a steady warmth that promised protection, understanding, and most importantly, a path forward. Together. The Thompson family settled into a new rhythm during their final days at Eleanor's cabin. Each morning, Sarah and Duke rose early for their rehabilitation walks, now accompanied by either Robert or Martha. Duke grew stronger daily, his military training becoming more evident as his health improved. He no longer limped, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by alert vigilance, especially when Sarah was near. "It's remarkable," Martha commented on their 6th morning, watching Sarah and Duke return from their walk with Robert. "Look at her. She's smiling, talking. She hasn't been like this since before the accident." Eleanor nodded, sorting dried herbs at her kitchen table. "Animals often heal what medicine cannot, particularly dogs like Duke, who are trained to sense emotions, to respond to trauma." "You mean because he was a service dog for veterans with PTSD?" "Among other things," Eleanor confirmed. Duke was specifically trained to detect anxiety, panic attacks, and emotional distress. He responds instinctively to Sarah's needs because that's what he was bred and trained to do. Outside, Sarah was demonstrating to her father how Duke now responded to basic commands, sit, stay, come, that Eleanor had helped her reinforce. "Good boy," Sarah praised, as Duke executed a perfect sit-stay despite a squirrel darting across the yard. She rewarded him with a small treat from the pouch Eleanor had given her. The transformation in her daughter made Martha's heart ache with both joy and apprehension. "We leave tomorrow," she said quietly. "Back to reality." Eleanor's hands stilled on the herbs. "Reality is what we make it, Martha. Sometimes a detour becomes the main road." Before Martha could respond, her cell phone rang, a rare occurrence given the spotty reception at Eleanor's cabin. She stepped outside to answer it, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "That was the bank," she told Robert when he and Sarah came inside. "They need you to sign additional paperwork for the loan modification before they'll consider postponing the foreclosure." Robert's face darkened. "I submitted everything they asked for last week." "They're saying they never received it. It has to be done in person, at the branch." The brief respite from their financial troubles evaporated as reality came crashing back. Robert checked his watch. "If we leave now, we might make it before they close." "That's a 4-hour drive," Martha protested. "Do we have a choice?" Robert snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry, it's just—" "I know," Martha said, placing a hand on his arm. "We should go. But what about Sarah and Duke?" Eleanor, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "They can stay here tonight. You can return tomorrow as planned." Robert hesitated, his protective instincts warring with practical necessity. "Dad, I'll be fine," Sarah assured him. "If Duke is with me, and Eleanor knows more about caring for him than anyone." After a brief discussion, the decision was made. Robert and Martha would drive back to Nashville, handle the bank paperwork, and return the following day. They would pack up the necessary items from home for Duke's arrival and inform Sarah's therapist about the significant development in her recovery. As her parents prepared to leave, Sarah felt a surprising calm. 6 days ago, the thought of being separated from them would have triggered intense anxiety, a lingering effect of the accident and losing Melissa. Now, with Duke at her side and Eleanor's steady presence, she felt secure. "We'll be back before dinner tomorrow," Martha promised, hugging her daughter tightly. "Call us if you need anything. The reception is better on the ridge." "I'll be fine, Mom," Sarah assured her, with a confidence that both relieved and surprised her parents. After they departed, Eleanor and Sarah spent the afternoon continuing Duke's rehabilitation exercises and preparing for his transition to the Thompson home. Eleanor provided detailed instructions for his diet, medication, and training requirements. "He'll need a routine," Eleanor explained as they sat on the porch, Duke resting at Sarah's feet. "Military dogs thrive on structure, regular feeding times, exercise, training sessions." Sarah nodded earnestly, taking notes in a journal Martha had found in her purse. "What about his nightmares? He still whimpers sometimes when he's sleeping." Eleanor's expression softened. "Just like humans with PTSD, Duke will have good days and bad days. When the nightmares come, your presence will be his greatest comfort, just as his is for you." Sarah reached down to stroke Duke's head, receiving a gentle nudge in return. The connection between them had deepened each day, a silent understanding that required no words. That evening, after a simple dinner, Eleanor surprised Sarah by retrieving a weathered leather case from her bedroom. Inside was a beautifully maintained violin. "You play?" Sarah asked in surprise. Eleanor smiled, a youthful light entering her eyes. "For over 60 years now. Music was my first medicine, long before herbs and veterinary science." She positioned the instrument under her chin. "Any requests?" "Whatever you love most," Sarah replied, settling on the floor beside Duke. Eleanor began to play, the rich tones filling the cabin with unexpected warmth. She performed without sheet music, her fingers finding the notes from memory, folk melodies, classical passages, and haunting improvisations that seemed to capture the essence of the surrounding mountains. Duke's reaction was immediate and touching. His ears perked forward, head tilting slightly as he listened with evident appreciation. Gradually, he relaxed completely, his large body leaning against Sarah's side, eyes half closed in contentment. "He loves it," Sarah whispered when Eleanor paused between pieces. "Music reaches parts of us that words cannot," Eleanor replied, "for both humans and animals." She launched into another melody, this one livelier than before. Later, as they prepared for bed, Sarah felt a strange reluctance to leave Eleanor's cabin the next day. This place, initially so foreign, had become a sanctuary where healing had begun for both her and Duke. The thought of returning to Nashville, to the house filled with memories of her life before the accident, brought a flutter of anxiety to her chest. "It's natural to be apprehensive," Eleanor observed, seeming to read her thoughts. "Change, even good change, can be frightening." "What if it's different when we get home?" Sarah voiced her deepest fear. "What if I go back to how I was before? What if Duke doesn't adjust?" Eleanor sat beside her on the edge of the guest bed. "Sarah, the healing that's begun here doesn't depend on this place. It's within you, within Duke, within the bond you've formed. She took Sarah's hand. Take what you've learned here and build on it, one day at a time. Sarah nodded, drawing comfort from the older woman's certainty. Will we see you again? Of course, Eleanor assured her. I wouldn't entrust Duke to just anyone. I'll visit in a few weeks to check on his progress. Her blue eyes twinkled. And yours? That night, Sarah slept more soundly than she had in months. Duke's solid presence on the floor beside her bed, a constant reassurance. She dreamed not of screeching tires and shattering glass, but of sunlit meadows and Duke running at full strength, his powerful body healed and whole. Morning arrived with a stunning sunrise that painted Eleanor's clearing in shades of gold and pink. Sarah and Duke took one final walk to the meadow, savoring the peace of the early hour. Duke seemed to understand this was a farewell of sorts. He explored every corner of the meadow with thoroughness, as if committing it to memory. When they returned, Eleanor was waiting with a hearty breakfast and a small wooden box. For Duke, she explained, sliding it across the table to Sarah. His medals and service records, Michael would want him to have them. Sarah opened the box carefully. Inside lay several military decorations, photographs of Duke in his working harness, and a folded American flag in a triangular case. The flag was for Michael, Eleanor said quietly, but Duke served just as honorably. Perhaps it should be displayed where he can see it. Sarah was touched beyond words. Thank you. We'll find the perfect place for it. After breakfast, they packed Sarah's few belongings and Duke's medication into a small bag. Eleanor provided additional supplies, specially formulated dog food, herbal supplements, and a proper harness that she'd adjusted to fit Duke's frame. One last thing, Eleanor said, retrieving a leather-bound journal from her bookshelf. My notes on Duke's training, his commands, his medical history. Everything I know about him is in here. Sarah accepted the journal reverently. I'll study every page. As they waited on the porch for Robert and Martha to arrive, a comfortable silence fell between them. Duke lay at Sarah's feet, occasionally lifting his head to scan the surrounding forest, always vigilant, always protective. You've given me my life back, Sarah said suddenly, needing Eleanor to understand the depth of her gratitude. Both of you. Eleanor's weathered face creased in a smile. No, child. We just helped you find the strength that was already there. The sound of an approaching car announced Robert and Martha's arrival. Duke stood alert, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah until he recognized the vehicle. As her parents stepped out of the car, Sarah noted subtle changes. They stood closer together than they had in months, their shoulders no longer rigid with unspoken tension. Whatever they had discussed during their time alone seemed to have eased some of the strain between them. Everything go okay at the bank? Sarah asked as they approached. Robert's expression was cautiously optimistic. They've granted us a 90-day extension to catch up on payments. It's not a permanent solution, but it gives us breathing room. And we've got some other news, Martha added, exchanging a meaningful glance with her husband. Your father has a promising job interview next week. It's not his old position, but the salary would be enough to keep the house. Sarah hugged them both, genuinely relieved. Duke circled the family group, his tail wagging slightly as he sensed the positive emotions. After loading Sarah's bag into the car, the time for goodbyes had come. Eleanor knelt to Duke's level, gently taking his massive head between her hands. No words were spoken, but the connection between them, the shared love for the man who had first brought them together, was palpable. Take care of her, Eleanor finally whispered, pressing her forehead briefly against Duke's. As you took care of my son. Duke's soft whine and steady gaze seemed to convey understanding. When Eleanor stood, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, Robert said, extending his hand. For everything. Eleanor clasped his hand firmly. Remember what we discussed, Robert. Some fears must be faced to be conquered. He nodded, a silent acknowledgment passing between them. Martha embraced Eleanor warmly, promising to call with updates on Duke's progress. When it was Sarah's turn, words seemed inadequate. "I don't know how to thank you," she began. Eleanor stopped her with a gentle hand on her cheek. "Live fully, Sarah. That's all the thanks I need." The drive back to Nashville was filled with conversation, more than the Thompson family had shared in months. Sarah detailed Duke's progress, his training, the special care he would need. Robert and Martha listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed they had already begun making plans for Duke's integration into their home. "I cleared out the corner of the living room for his bed," Martha explained. "And we picked up the supplies Eleanor listed: food, bowls, medications. And I fixed that loose section of fence in the backyard," Robert added. "He'll need a secure place to exercise." Sarah was touched by their preparations. "You did all that last night?" "We want this to work, honey," Martha said simply, "for all of us." As they approached the outskirts of Nashville, Sarah felt Duke tense beside her. The shepherd's ears flattened slightly as the rural landscape gave way to suburbs, then city streets. The noise, the traffic, the confining buildings, all represented potential threats to a dog trained for combat scenarios. "It's okay, boy," Sarah soothed, keeping her hand on his shoulder. "This is going to be our home." When they finally pulled into their driveway, Sarah experienced a moment of disorientation. The house looked exactly as they had left it a week ago, yet everything had changed. She was no longer the same person who had departed, numb with grief and guilt. Duke was no longer the dying animal they had found on a muddy road. They were both survivors now, moving forward together. Duke exited the car cautiously, his posture alert as he surveyed the new territory. Sarah kept him close as they approached the front door, speaking softly to reassure him. "This is home now, Duke." "You're safe here." Inside, evidence of Martha and Robert's hasty preparations was everywhere. A large dog bed in the corner of the living room, water and food bowls in the kitchen, a basket of new toys carefully selected for a dog of Duke's intelligence and training. "We want him to feel welcome," Martha explained, watching Duke's methodical inspection of the house. The shepherd moved from room to room, sniffing doorways, checking windows, familiarizing himself with every corner, a security sweep ingrained by his military training. When he reached Sarah's bedroom, he paused at the threshold, looking to her for permission. "It's okay," she encouraged. "Come in." Duke entered slowly, taking in the space that held Sarah's essence. Photos on the walls, books on the shelves, the lingering scent of the person he had bonded with. He approached her bed, sniffing carefully before settling on the floor beside it, choosing his post, assuming his duty. "I think he's claiming his spot," Robert observed from the doorway. Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "He knows where he's needed." That night, after settling Duke into his new routine, the Thompson family gathered in the living room. For the first time in nearly a year, they sat together, not in pained silence, but in genuine connection. Duke lay at Sarah's feet, occasionally lifting his head to check each family member, as if assuring himself of their well-being. "I called Dr. Wilson today," Martha mentioned, referring to Sarah's therapist. "She's very interested in meeting Duke. She said animal-assisted therapy has shown remarkable results for PTSD patients." "I'm not a patient," Sarah said automatically, then caught herself. "But I guess I do have PTSD, don't I? Just like Duke." Robert nodded slowly. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, honey. You've been through something terrible. So has he." He glanced at the shepherd. "Maybe that's why you understand each other." It was the most direct acknowledgement of Sarah's mental health struggles that Robert had ever made. Before Duke, conversations about the accident and its aftermath had been stilted, laden with awkward pauses and unspoken fears. "I'd like Dr. Wilson to meet him," Sarah decided. "Eleanor said he might be able to train as a therapy dog eventually. Maybe he could help other people too." Martha smiled, exchanging a glance with Robert. "One step at a time, honey." As the evening wound down, Sarah prepared for bed with Duke shadowing her movements. When she finally settled under the covers, Duke assumed his position on the floor beside her bed, his eyes reflecting the dim light from the hallway. "Good night, Duke," she whispered. "Welcome home." His tail thumped once against the carpet in acknowledgement. Sarah drifted off to sleep feeling safer than she had in months, unaware that the greatest test of their newfound bond was yet to come. 2 weeks passed, and Duke's integration into the Thompson household exceeded everyone's expectations. The shepherd adapted to suburban life with remarkable resilience, quickly learning the family's routines and establishing his own. Each morning he accompanied Sarah on a run through the neighborhood, building his strength while she regained hers. He attended her therapy sessions with Dr. Wilson, who marveled at the immediate calming effect he had when Sarah discussed difficult aspects of the accident. At home, Duke became the silent guardian of the family's emotional state. He sensed tension before it erupted, often inserting himself between Robert and Martha when discussions about finances grew heated. His steady presence seemed to remind them of what truly mattered, diffusing arguments before they could escalate. For Sarah, the change was profound. The nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, Duke was there, his weight leaning against her bed, his soft whine pulling her back to reality before the terror could fully take hold. She returned to school, bringing Duke as a registered service animal after Dr. Wilson provided the necessary documentation. His presence in the hallways drew curious stares and questions, but Sarah found herself able to explain his role in her life with growing confidence. "He helps me with my PTSD," she told her classmates matter-of-factly, "and I help him with his." Robert's job interview led to a position with a smaller manufacturing company. Lower pay than his previous job, but enough to keep them afloat while Martha increased her nursing hours at the local clinic. Their financial situation remained precarious, but no longer desperate. Eleanor called weekly for updates on Duke's progress, providing guidance on his continuing rehabilitation and training. She promised to visit soon, a prospect that Sarah eagerly anticipated. Life was finding a new normal. Not the same as before the accident, but perhaps more authentic in its acknowledgement of both pain and healing. Then came the Saturday, when everything changed. The day began typically enough. Sarah and Duke completed their morning run, returning home as Robert was preparing to mow the lawn. The spring weather had turned unseasonably warm, the temperature climbing into the high 80s by mid-morning. "Be sure to drink plenty of water," Martha cautioned as she left for her shift at the clinic. "Both of you." Sarah planned to work on a history project in the backyard, enjoying the sunshine while Duke explored the newly secured yard. As she spread her books on the patio table, Robert started the lawnmower at the far end of the property. Duke had been restless all morning, pacing the perimeter of the yard with unusual frequency. Sarah attributed his behavior to the heat or perhaps the noise of the lawnmower, but as the morning progressed, his agitation increased. He repeatedly returned to a particular corner of the yard near an old woodpile, sniffing intently before circling back to check on Sarah. "What is it, boy?" she asked after his third inspection of the area. Duke whined softly, looking from Sarah to the woodpile and back again. Curious, Sarah set aside her books and followed Duke to the corner of the yard. The woodpile had been there since they moved in 5 years ago, rarely used since they switched to a gas fireplace. Robert had mentioned clearing it out eventually, but never found the time. Duke stopped several feet from the pile, his posture suddenly alert, body rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Not the casual warning he gave to passing squirrels, but a deep, serious sound that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. "Duke?" she questioned, taking another step toward the woodpile. The shepherd moved with lightning speed, inserting himself between Sarah and the woodpile. His growl intensified and Sarah froze, recognizing the warning for what it was. "Dad!" she called over the sound of the lawnmower. "Dad, come here!" Robert couldn't hear her over the engine. Duke's growl transitioned to a sharp bark, 3 in rapid succession, then silence as he listened, his entire body vibrating with tension. Sarah began to back away, remembering Eleanor's warnings about copperheads. "Dad!" she called again, louder this time. Duke remained fixated on the woodpile, his attention caught by some movement Sarah couldn't detect. She took another step back, planning to circle around to get her father's attention. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. A large copperhead, disturbed by the lawnmower's vibrations or drawn out by the heat, slithered from beneath the woodpile directly toward Sarah. Duke lunged forward with military precision, placing himself between Sarah and the snake. The copperhead struck, its movement so fast it was almost invisible. Duke caught it mid-strike, his powerful jaws clamping around the snake's head with practiced efficiency. The snake's body whipped violently as Duke shook it, ensuring the venomous head couldn't make contact. "Duke!" Sarah screamed, the sound finally catching Robert's attention. He killed the lawnmower engine in time to see Duke dropping the now limp snake to the ground, its head crushed in his powerful jaws. "Sarah! Get back!" Robert shouted, running toward them. Duke swayed slightly, his mission accomplished. As Robert reached them, the shepherd turned to Sarah, checking her for injury with anxious eyes. Only then did Sarah notice the blood on Duke's muzzle, not all of it from the snake. "Dad, he's been bit," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside Duke. The puncture wounds were visible on his face, already beginning to swell. "The snake got him." Robert assessed the situation with a quick glance. "Get in the car. Now!" As Sarah urged Duke toward the house, the shepherd's steps became increasingly unsteady. By the time they reached the car, he needed Robert's help to climb into the back seat. "The emergency vet clinic is on Belmont," Robert said, his voice tight with urgency as he started the engine. "Call your mother. Tell her to meet us there." Sarah's hands shook as she dialed, her eyes never leaving Duke. The shepherd's breathing had become labored, his powerful body trembling as the venom began to take effect. The parallels to the day they found him were devastatingly clear. Once again, Duke's life hung in the balance. But this time, the danger had come while protecting her. "Stay with me," she pleaded, cradling his head in her lap as Robert navigated traffic with reckless speed. "Please, Duke." "Stay with me." Duke's eyes, though clouded with pain, remained fixed on her face, steady, resolute, unwavering in his commitment to the human he had chosen to protect. In that moment, as Robert ran a red light and Martha promised to meet them at the clinic, Sarah understood with perfect clarity what Eleanor had meant about souls finding each other. Some connections transcended explanation. Some loyalties defied logic. And sometimes salvation came in forms we never expected, even that of a wounded warrior with 4 paws and a heart brave enough to face death twice for those he loved. Robert screeched into the parking lot of the Nashville Emergency Veterinary Clinic, tires protesting against the pavement. Duke's breathing had grown increasingly labored during the 15-minute drive, his powerful body trembling as the venom worked its way through his system. Sarah hadn't stopped talking to him for a single moment, her voice a lifeline tethering him to consciousness. "We're here, boy. Help is coming. Stay with me." The clinic's glass doors slid open as Robert rushed inside, leaving Sarah with Duke in the back seat. He returned moments later with 2 veterinary technicians wheeling a gurney. "Copperhead bite approximately 20 minutes ago," one technician said, quickly assessing Duke as they carefully transferred him to the gurney. Facial swelling already significant. Let's get him inside, stat. Sarah ran alongside the gurney, one hand on Duke's shoulder, unwilling to break physical contact. The shepherd's eyes, though glazed with pain, remained fixed on her face. "Family can wait in the consultation room," the second technician said as they approached the treatment area doors. "Dr. Patel will be right with you." "No," Sarah protested, her voice breaking. "I need to stay with him. He needs me." The technician's expression softened with understanding, but remained firm. "We need space to work. The doctor will update you very soon, I promise." Robert gently pulled Sarah back as the team wheeled Duke through the swinging doors. "Let them do their job, honey." The moment the doors closed, Sarah's composure shattered. She collapsed against her father, sobs racking her body. "He can't die, Dad. Not after everything. Not because of me." Robert held her tightly, his own eyes damp. "This isn't your fault. Duke was doing what he was trained to do, what he chose to do." He guided her to the small consultation room where a nurse was waiting with intake forms. "I need as much information as possible about the dog," the nurse explained, clipboard ready. "Age, medical history, any existing conditions." Sarah wiped her eyes, struggling to focus. "His name is Duke. He's a former military working dog, about 7 years old. He has previous injuries, a gunshot wound that's mostly healed, and he was in an accident about 3 weeks ago. He's on medication for that, but I don't have it with me." The nurse wrote quickly. "Any allergies to medications that you're aware of?" Sarah felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. Despite Eleanor's journal and all they'd learned about Duke, there was so much they still didn't know about his medical history. I don't know," she admitted, fresh tears threatening. Robert stepped in. "His previous owner might have that information. I can call her." As Robert stepped outside to call Eleanor, the clinic doors opened again, and Martha rushed in, still wearing her nursing scrubs. She embraced Sarah tightly. "I came as soon as I could. How is he?" "They just took him back," Sarah managed, clinging to her mother. "It was a copperhead, Mom. He saved me. The snake would have bitten me if Duke hadn't—" Martha stroked her daughter's hair. "Shh, I know. You're safe. And we're going to do everything possible for Duke." Dr. Patel, a petite woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence, entered the consultation room 20 minutes later. Sarah immediately stood, searching the doctor's expression for clues. "Duke is stabilized for now," Dr. Patel began. "We've administered antivenom and are managing his pain. The good news is that you got him here quickly, which significantly improves his prognosis." "So he'll be okay?" Sarah asked, hope rising. Dr. Patel's expression turned cautious. "The next 12 hours are critical. The venom has caused significant swelling around the bite site, and given the location on his face, we're monitoring his airway carefully. Additionally, his previous injuries have complicated matters. His system was already stressed from healing." "What does that mean?" Martha asked, her medical training prompting her to seek specifics. "It means we're seeing some concerning kidney values in his blood work," Dr. Patel explained. "This could be related to the venom, or it might indicate that his previous injuries caused more internal damage than was initially apparent." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. "But you can help him, right? There's treatment?" "We're doing everything medically possible," Dr. Patel assured her. "Fluid therapy, antivenom, antibiotics, pain management. But I want to be honest with you. Duke is fighting a serious battle right now." Robert, who had returned from calling Eleanor, asked the question Sarah couldn't bring herself to voice. "What are his chances?" Dr. Patel considered her answer carefully. "If he makes it through the night, his chances improve significantly. I'd say we're looking at about a 60% chance of full recovery, but that could change, for better or worse, in the next few hours. The assessment hung heavy in the air, 60%. A little better than a coin flip for Duke's life. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Dr. Patel continued gently. Emergency veterinary care, especially involving antivenin and intensive monitoring, is expensive. I need to provide you with a treatment estimate. She handed Robert a form. Sarah watched her father's face carefully as he scanned the numbers, knowing their financial situation remained precarious despite his new job. The mortgage extension, the reduced income, the existing medical bills from her therapy, all of it weighed heavily on the family's finances. Robert swallowed hard, but didn't hesitate. Do whatever Duke needs. We'll figure out the rest. Dr. Patel nodded. We'll need a deposit to continue treatment. The front desk can help you with payment options. After the doctor left, Martha squeezed Robert's hand. How bad? $5,000 for the initial treatment, he said quietly. Potentially more, depending on complications. Sarah felt a crushing weight of guilt. The family's financial struggles were no secret to her, and now Duke's medical bills would add to that burden, all because he had protected her. I'll use my college fund, she said suddenly. It's my fault this happened. I'll pay for it. Absolutely not, Robert replied firmly. That money is for your future, and this was not your fault, Sarah. Duke did exactly what he was trained to do. But we can't afford. We'll find a way, Martha interrupted. That's what families do, and Duke is family now. Robert went to handle the deposit and paperwork while Martha and Sarah waited for news. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sarah couldn't stop replaying the moment. Duke's lightning-fast reaction, the snake's strike, the blood on his muzzle. If only she had recognized his agitation sooner. If only she had stayed away from the woodpile. Stop, Martha said gently, reading her daughter's thoughts. This spiral of if-onlys doesn't help Duke, and it doesn't help you. I can't lose him, Mom, Sarah whispered. Not after Melissa. I can't lose someone else I love. Martha pulled her daughter close. I know, honey, I know. 3 hours later, they were allowed to see Duke briefly. The shepherd lay on a treatment table, an IV line delivering fluids to his foreleg, his face swollen almost beyond recognition. Despite his condition, his tail thumped weakly against the table when he heard Sarah's voice. Hey, brave boy, she said, gently stroking the uninjured side of his head. You're doing so great. Duke's eyes, though glazed with medication, focused on her face. The steady gaze that had become her anchor over the past weeks was dimmed but still present, still fighting. The next few hours are crucial, the veterinary technician explained. We're monitoring him constantly. You should go home, get some rest. We'll call with any changes. I'm not leaving him, Sarah said immediately. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. Sarah, there's nothing we can do here. The professionals are taking care of him. You don't understand, Sarah insisted, her voice rising. Duke wouldn't leave me, not ever. I'm not leaving him. Martha and Robert exchanged looks, recognizing the determination in their daughter's stance, the same determination they'd seen when she'd insisted on helping the dying dog on that rural road. I'll stay with her, Martha offered. You go home, get some sleep. You have work tomorrow. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Call me if anything changes. Anything at all. The clinic staff set up 2 reclining chairs in a quiet corner of the waiting room for Martha and Sarah. As the night deepened, Martha dozed intermittently, but Sarah remained wide awake, her thoughts alternating between desperate hope and paralyzing fear. Around 2 a.m., Dr. Patel emerged from the treatment area, her expression grave. Sarah immediately stood, her heart hammering. Duke is struggling, the doctor said without preamble. His kidney values are continuing to rise, and he's showing signs of respiratory distress from the facial swelling. What does that mean? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. It means we need to consider the possibility that he may not recover, Dr. Patel said gently. I want to be clear. We haven't exhausted all options yet, but you should prepare yourselves. Martha, now fully awake, asked, What other options are there? We can try a more aggressive treatment protocol, including dialysis support for his kidneys, but I have to tell you, it would significantly increase the cost of care, and it's still not a guarantee. The unspoken question hung in the air. Was it worth the financial burden for a dog they'd only had for a few weeks, especially when success wasn't assured? Do it, Sarah said, before either of her parents could speak. Whatever he needs. Martha nodded her agreement. We'll find a way to manage the cost. Please, do everything you can for him. As Dr. Patel returned to the treatment area, Sarah sank back into her chair, a sob escaping her throat. This can't be happening. Not again. Martha held her daughter as she cried. Duke is strong, Sarah. And he has something to fight for. He has you. But what if that's not enough? Sarah whispered. What if love isn't enough this time either? The question, raw and painful, echoed the doubts that had haunted Sarah since Melissa's death. What if love and hope and prayers weren't enough to keep death at bay? What if life was simply random cruelty, taking the good and leaving survivors to wonder why? Martha had no easy answers. Only her presence and the comfort of arms that had held Sarah through every storm of her 17 years. As dawn broke over Nashville, painting the clinic waiting room in pale golden light, Robert returned with fresh clothes for Sarah and Martha and enough coffee to fuel an army. Any news? He asked, his face lined with worry. They're trying a more aggressive treatment, Martha explained quietly. But it's not looking good, Robert. Sarah sat apart from her parents, staring out the window as the city awakened. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, had barely moved from her vigil. The weight of potential loss pressed down on her chest, making each breath an effort. A commotion at the clinic's front desk drew their attention. A tall, silver-haired woman had entered, her commanding presence causing the receptionist to straighten instinctively. Eleanor! Sarah exclaimed, rushing to embrace the older woman. Eleanor Jenkins returned the hug briefly before pulling back, her blue eyes sharp with focus. Where is he? How bad? It's not good, Martha admitted. The venom, combined with his previous injuries, they're trying everything, but his kidneys are failing. Eleanor's expression hardened with determination. I need to speak with the veterinarian. Immediately. Eleanor, Robert began cautiously, Dr. Patel is excellent. They're doing everything medically possible. Not everything, Eleanor replied cryptically. She turned to the receptionist. Please inform Dr. Patel that Lieutenant Colonel Eleanor Jenkins, U.S. BES, Army Veterinary Corps, retired, is here regarding the German Shepherd, Duke. Tell her I have his complete military medical records and specialized treatment protocols for combat dogs with venom exposure. The receptionist, clearly impressed by Eleanor's authoritative tone, immediately picked up the phone. How did you get here so fast? Sarah asked, hope flickering to life within her. I left the moment your father called, Eleanor explained. Drove straight through. Duke is more than just a dog to me, Sarah. He's the last connection to my son. Dr. Patel emerged from the treatment area, her expression curious, but cautious. Colonel Jenkins, I'm Dr. Patel. Eleanor stepped forward. Doctor, I understand Duke's condition is critical. I have his complete military medical history, including previous reactions to medications and specialized treatment protocols developed for military working dogs exposed to venomous reptiles in combat zones. She handed over a flash drive and a folder of documents. Additionally, I've brought supplements that have proven effective in supporting kidney function during venom recovery in military canines. They're not standard protocol in civilian veterinary medicine, but they've been extensively tested in military applications. Dr. Patel scanned the documents with professional interest. This is quite comprehensive. You developed these protocols yourself? Yes, during my time overseeing canine medical operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Snake encounters were unfortunately common, and we developed specialized approaches that took into account the unique physiology of combat dogs. The two women spoke in rapid medical terminology that went over Sarah's head, but she understood the essential truth. Eleanor had brought hope, and potentially a path forward that hadn't existed moments before. After reviewing the documents, Dr. Patel nodded. I'd like to incorporate some of these approaches into Duke's treatment plan with your input, Colonel. They're unorthodox by civilian standards, but the research is sound. Of course, Eleanor agreed. And please, call me Eleanor. As the two women disappeared into the treatment area, Robert, Martha, and Sarah were left to wait once more, but now with a fragile seed of hope taking root. Do you think it will help? Sarah asked her parents, afraid to believe too firmly in the possibility. If anyone can help Duke now, it's Eleanor, Robert said, and Sarah was struck by the confidence in his voice, confidence in a woman he had known for barely a week. Hours passed as Eleanor worked alongside Dr. Patel and the clinic staff. Occasionally, a technician would emerge with an update. Duke's oxygen levels had stabilized. The kidney values had stopped rising but hadn't improved. The swelling was beginning to respond to treatment. Each small piece of news was a lifeline that Sarah clung to desperately. Finally, late in the afternoon, Eleanor and Dr. Patel emerged together. Their expressions were guarded but no longer bore the grave certainty of impending loss. Duke is responding to the modified treatment protocol, Dr. Patel announced. His kidney values have begun to improve slightly, and his respiratory function has stabilized. Does that mean he'll recover? Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. It's too soon to say definitively, Dr. Patel cautioned. But I'm more optimistic than I was this morning. The next 24 hours will tell us more. Eleanor's face showed the exhaustion of her marathon drive and hours of medical consultation, but her blue eyes remained clear and determined. Duke is a fighter, Sarah. He always has been, and now he has someone worth fighting for. Sarah's tears came again, but this time they were tears of cautious hope rather than despair. Can I see him? Dr. Patel nodded. Briefly, he's heavily sedated, but your presence may help. Duke lay in the treatment area, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. The swelling in his face had begun to subside slightly, but he still looked nothing like the strong, vigilant shepherd who had become Sarah's guardian. His chest rose and fell with labored but steady breaths. Sarah approached carefully, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "Hey, Duke," she whispered. "Eleanor's here. She came all the way from Tennessee to help you. And I'm here too. I'm not leaving." She could have sworn that, even in his sedated state, Duke's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, a tiny acknowledgement that he heard her, that he was still fighting. "You saved my life," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "Now it's my turn to save yours. So you have to keep fighting, okay? We all need you to come home." As she stood beside her dog, for Duke was truly hers now, in all the ways that mattered, Sarah felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She had been here before, at this precipice between life and death, between hope and loss. With Melissa, the outcome had been beyond her control, predetermined by the crush of metal and glass. But this time felt different. This time, there was still a chance to affect the outcome, still hope that love and medicine and sheer determination might be enough to pull Duke back from the edge. As Eleanor gently led her from the treatment area, Sarah made a silent promise to both Duke and herself. If he survived this, she would never again take for granted the miracle of second chances. She would live fully, as Eleanor had urged her to do, honoring both those she had lost and those who remained by her side. For now, though, all she could do was wait and hope, and trust that the bond between a broken girl and a wounded warrior was strong enough to overcome even this final test. The waiting room of the Nashville Emergency Veterinary Clinic had become a second home for the Thompson family. 24 hours had stretched into 48 as Duke fought for his life, his condition fluctuating between cautious improvement and alarming setbacks. Sarah refused to leave, sleeping in short bursts on the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, eating only when Martha insisted. Robert divided his time between the clinic, work, and home, his face growing more lined with each passing day as financial concerns mounted alongside their emotional strain. Eleanor remained as well, working closely with Dr. Patel to adjust Duke's treatment as needed. The two women had developed an unexpected rapport, the younger veterinarian clearly impressed by Eleanor's extensive knowledge and innovative approaches to canine trauma care. "His kidney values are finally showing consistent improvement," Dr. Patel announced on the morning of the third day, reviewing Duke's latest blood work. "And the swelling has reduced significantly. If this trend continues, we might be able to reduce his sedation later today." Sarah, who had been dozing against her mother's shoulder, immediately straightened. "Does that mean he's going to be okay?" Dr. Patel's expression was cautiously optimistic. "He's not out of the woods yet, but he's heading in the right direction. Duke is proving to be remarkably resilient." "He's a warrior," Eleanor said simply. "It's in his blood." As the day progressed, Duke's vital signs continued to stabilize. By late afternoon, Dr. Patel deemed it safe to begin reducing his sedation, allowing him to gradually regain consciousness. "He may be disoriented at first," she warned Sarah, "and likely in some pain, though we'll continue to manage that with medication. Try not to overwhelm him." Sarah nodded, hardly daring to believe that Duke might truly be recovering. The past 3 days had been an emotional roller coaster, each improvement followed by a setback that threatened to extinguish hope. Now, standing beside his treatment table as a technician adjusted his IV medication, Sarah felt almost afraid to embrace the possibility that the worst might be behind them. "Talk to him," Eleanor encouraged, standing beside her. "Let him hear your voice as he wakes up. It will help orient him." Sarah swallowed hard and leaned closer to Duke's ear. "Hey, boy," she whispered. "It's Sarah. You're doing so great. Everyone's been fighting so hard for you, but no one harder than you." At first there was no response. Duke's breathing remained steady but showed no change. Sarah continued talking, sharing mundane details about the clinic, the staff who had cared for him, the spring weather outside. Then, almost imperceptibly, Duke's ear twitched. His eyelids fluttered, struggling against the lingering effects of sedation. Sarah held her breath, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "That's it," she encouraged. "You can do it, Duke." With visible effort, Duke's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing as they found Sarah's face. Recognition dawned in their brown depths, and his tail moved weakly against the treatment table. "He knows you," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Even through the medication, he knows exactly who you are." Dr. Patel stepped forward to check Duke's vitals and reflexes, pleased with his responsiveness. "This is very encouraging," she confirmed. "If he continues to improve at this rate, we might be able to discuss discharge planning in a few days." The news should have brought nothing but relief, but Sarah noticed her father's slight wince at the mention of discharge. She understood immediately. Each day at the emergency clinic added to the already substantial bill. Robert had been uncharacteristically vague about finances when she'd asked, focusing instead on Duke's recovery. But Sarah wasn't naive. She knew the family was stretching beyond their means to save Duke. That evening, as Sarah finally agreed to go home for a proper night's sleep while Eleanor stayed with Duke, she overheard her parents talking in low voices in the clinic parking lot. "The credit card is maxed out," Robert was saying, his voice strained. "I've applied for a personal loan, but with the mortgage situation still unresolved." "What about my mother's jewelry?" Martha suggested. "We could sell—" "No," Robert interrupted firmly. "Those are family heirlooms. There has to be another way." Sarah felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Once again, her family was sacrificing for her, this time for the dog who had saved her life. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders as they drove home in silence. The following morning, Sarah approached her father before they returned to the clinic. "Dad, I know about the money problems," she said directly. "And I meant what I said before. I want to use my college fund for Duke's treatment." Robert's expression softened. "Sarah, honey, that's not an option. Your education comes first." "But what good is college if I can't even—" She trailed off, struggling to articulate the complex emotions. "Duke saved my life, Dad. And not just from the snake. He saved me from myself. From the guilt and the nightmares and the feeling that I should have died instead of Melissa." Robert pulled her into a tight embrace. "I know, sweetheart. And we're going to find a way through this. I promise." When they arrived at the clinic, they found Eleanor in deep conversation with a tall, distinguished man in a military uniform. She beckoned them over immediately. "Robert, Martha, Sarah, I'd like you to meet Colonel James Hendricks, director of the Military Working Dog Program at Fort Campbell." The colonel shook their hands firmly. "Eleanor has told me about Duke's situation. Remarkable animal, one of our finest." Sarah glanced between them, confused. "I don't understand. Why are you here?" Colonel Hendricks smiled. "When a military working dog is injured in the line of duty, their medical care is covered by the program even after retirement." He gestured toward the treatment area where Duke was recovering. "Duke was never officially retired from service. According to our records, he was listed as missing, presumed deceased, after disappearing from the base kennels following Captain Jenkins's funeral." Martha gasped. "So the military will cover Duke's medical expenses?" "Not only that," Colonel Hendricks continued, "but there's also a matter of Duke's service benefits." "Service benefits?" Robert echoed. "For a dog?" Eleanor stepped in. "Military working dogs who serve with distinction are entitled to certain benefits upon retirement, specialized medical care, stipends for food and maintenance, even insurance coverage for service-related conditions." "Since Duke was never officially retired," Colonel Hendricks explained, "all those benefits have been accruing. Once we process the paperwork to officially retire him to civilian life, specifically to your family, if that's your wish, those funds will be released." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. "So, Duke's medical bills will be paid? And there's money for his future care too?" "Exactly," Colonel Hendricks confirmed. "Eleanor contacted me as soon as she identified Duke and explained his situation. We've expedited the paperwork. Duke served his country with honor alongside Captain Jenkins. Taking care of him now is our duty and privilege." Robert appeared momentarily speechless. The financial burden that had been crushing him suddenly lifted. "I don't know what to say, Colonel. Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "No thanks necessary, Mr. Thompson. Although," the colonel added with a slight smile, "I would like to meet the dog who's caused such a stir in our department. Eleanor speaks very highly of his recovery progress." Dr. Patel gave permission for a brief visit. Duke was awake and more alert than the previous day, the swelling in his face noticeably reduced. When Colonel Hendricks approached, Duke's demeanor changed instantly. His ears pricked forward, and despite his weakened state, he made an effort to sit up straighter, as if recognizing the uniform and responding to years of military training. "At ease, soldier," the colonel said softly, placing a gentle hand on Duke's head. "You've done your duty admirably." The moment was unexpectedly moving, a recognition of Duke's service and sacrifice that went beyond his recent heroism in saving Sarah. For the first time, Sarah truly understood the depth of Duke's past life, the training and discipline that had shaped him long before he entered her world. After the colonel departed, promising to return with the completed paperwork once Duke was discharged, Sarah sat beside her dog, processing everything that had happened. "You never told us about the military benefits," she said to Eleanor, who was checking Duke's IV line with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades in veterinary medicine. "I wasn't certain they would be approved," Eleanor admitted. "Duke's case is unusual. Technically, he was missing for over a year, and his injuries during that time weren't documented. I didn't want to raise false hopes." "So that's why you called Colonel Hendricks?" "Partly," Eleanor nodded, "but also because Duke deserves recognition for his service, both to his country and to your family." Sarah studied the older woman's face, noting the subtle signs of exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. "You drove all night to get here. You haven't left the clinic in days. Why are you doing all this for us?" Eleanor's hand stilled on Duke's coat. "Not for you, Sarah. For Duke. And for Michael." She swallowed hard before continuing. "When my son died, a part of me died with him. Then Duke disappeared, and I lost the last living connection to Michael." She gestured toward Duke, who was watching their conversation with alert eyes. "Finding him again, seeing him form the same bond with you that he had with my son, it's given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Sarah asked softly. "Purpose," Eleanor replied simply. "And hope." The moment was interrupted by Dr. Patel, who arrived with Duke's latest test results. "His kidney values are almost back to normal," she announced. "And his respiratory function is excellent. If this continues, I think we can consider discharging him tomorrow with medications to continue at home." The news should have brought only joy. But Sarah noticed a flicker of something, regret, concern, cross Eleanor's face. Later, as they sat in the clinic's small courtyard getting some fresh air while Duke rested, Sarah broached the subject that had been nagging at her. "When Duke comes home, you'll visit us, right? You won't just disappear back to Tennessee?" Eleanor gazed at the spring flowers blooming along the courtyard wall. "My place is in the mountains, Sarah, and your place is here, with your family." "But you're part of this too," Sarah insisted. "Duke needs you. I need you." A sad smile touched Eleanor's lips. "You've grown stronger than you realize, Sarah, and Duke has found his new purpose with you." The realization hit Sarah suddenly. "You're saying goodbye, aren't you? Once Duke is discharged, you're going back to your cabin for good." Eleanor didn't deny it. "Some journeys we make together, and some we must make alone. My part in Duke's journey, and yours, is coming to its natural conclusion." "That's not fair," Sarah protested, surprising herself with the vehemence of her reaction. "After everything you've done, everything you've taught us about Duke—" "Life rarely concerns itself with what's fair," Eleanor replied gently. "You know that better than most." The truth of those words silenced Sarah's objections. She did know about life's unfairness, had learned it in the most painful way possible when Melissa died while she survived. "Will we ever see you again?" she finally asked. "Of course," Eleanor assured her, though something in her tone lacked conviction. "I'll check on Duke's progress, perhaps visit during the holidays." But Sarah understood what wasn't being said. Eleanor had completed her mission. She had found Duke, ensured his recovery, secured his future with the Thompson family. Now, she would return to her solitary life in the mountains, carrying her grief and memories back to the sanctuary she had created. The next morning brought both celebration and bitter sweetness. Duke's final tests confirmed his remarkable recovery, and Dr. Patel approved his discharge with a regimen of medications and follow-up appointments scheduled. He'll need restricted activity for at least 2 weeks, she instructed as a technician removed Duke's IV line for the final time. Short walks only, no running or jumping. The incision sites need to be kept clean and dry. Sarah nodded, memorizing each instruction. Duke, sensing his imminent freedom, stood tall despite his weakened state, his focus sharp as he surveyed the activity around him. Colonel Hendricks returned as promised, bringing official retirement papers for Duke, along with a formal military commendation for his years of service. In a small ceremony in the clinic lobby, he presented Duke with a specialized service medal, while staff and other clients watched with varying degrees of curiosity and emotion. In recognition of exemplary service to the United States Army through 3 combat deployments and numerous life-saving missions, the colonel read formally, Military Working Dog Duke is hereby honorably discharged from active duty and commended for valor above and beyond the call of duty. He pinned the medal to a new service vest that Duke would wear as a retired military dog, then saluted sharply. Duke, drawing on years of training, sat at perfect attention despite his recent ordeal, earning a murmur of appreciation from the assembled onlookers. Additionally, Colonel Hendricks continued, turning to the Thompson family, Duke's accumulated benefits have been processed. This card is linked to an account specifically for his ongoing care and maintenance. He handed Robert a specialized debit card. The account contains approximately $23,000, which should cover his needs for the remainder of his life. Robert accepted the card with visible emotion. Colonel, I don't know how to thank you. This is beyond generous. No gratitude necessary, Mr. Thompson. Duke earned every penny through his service. The colonel knelt to Duke's level, making direct eye contact with the shepherd. It's been an honor, soldier, he said quietly. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, Duke extended his paw in what appeared to be a trained response to a specific command. Colonel Hendricks smiled and shook the offered paw. Eleanor taught him that, he explained, rising. It was a tradition between Duke and Captain Jenkins after each successful mission. As the small ceremony concluded and the final discharge paperwork was processed, Sarah found herself watching Eleanor closely. The older woman maintained her composed exterior, but Sarah could see the cost of that composure in the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her weathered hands as she helped gather Duke's medications. When the time finally came to leave, Eleanor hung back as Robert brought the car around to the clinic entrance. Eleanor, aren't you coming with us? Martha asked, noticing her hesitation. I think it's best if I say my goodbyes here, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Duke is going home with his new family. That's as it should be. But you're welcome to stay with us, Martha insisted, at least for a few days before you drive back. Eleanor shook her head. Thank you, but I've imposed enough. And there are matters waiting for me at home. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat as she realized this truly was goodbye. Without Eleanor's intervention, Duke wouldn't be alive. None of this would have been possible. The debt they owed her could never be repaid. I don't want you to go, Sarah admitted, her voice small. Eleanor took Sarah's hands in her own. I know, child. But this chapter of the story belongs to you and Duke now. My part is complete. She knelt beside Duke, taking his magnificent head between her hands as she had done when they first parted at her cabin. No words were spoken, but something profound passed between them. A recognition, a farewell, a blessing. When Eleanor stood again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Take care of each other, she said simply. And remember what I told you about living fully. Before Sarah could respond, Robert pulled up with the car. The moment for extended goodbyes had passed. With one final embrace for each of them, Eleanor stepped back, a solitary figure framed in the clinic doorway as they helped Duke into the back seat of the family sedan. As they pulled away, Sarah looked back through the rear window. Eleanor raised her hand in farewell, her tall figure growing smaller with distance until she disappeared from view entirely. A guardian angel who had appeared when needed most and now returned to her solitary vigil in the mountains. "She didn't even let us thank her properly," Martha said softly from the front seat. "I don't think that's what she wanted," Robert replied, his voice thoughtful. "Some people help others because it's who they are, not for recognition or gratitude." In the back seat, Sarah sat with Duke's head resting on her lap, an echo of that first drive when they'd found him dying on a rural road. Now, despite his ordeal, his eyes were clear and alert, watching the familiar Nashville streets pass by as they headed home. "She'll be okay, won't she?" Sarah asked, uncertain whether she was asking about Eleanor or expressing her ongoing concern for Duke. "Eleanor," Robert clarified, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. She'll be fine." But Sarah wasn't entirely convinced. There had been something final in Eleanor's goodbye, something that suggested she was closing a chapter not just in Duke's life but in her own as well. As they turned onto their street, Duke's posture changed subtly, a heightened alertness, a recognition. Despite everything he had endured, he remembered their home, his new territory. When Robert parked in the driveway, Duke's tail began to wag slowly. "Welcome home, boy," Sarah whispered, helping him carefully out of the car. Duke stood for a moment on the lawn, surveying his surroundings with military precision before taking a tentative step forward. Together, the Thompson family and their extraordinary dog made their way toward the house, each step a small victory, each moment a gift that none of them would ever take for granted again. What they didn't yet know, what they couldn't have imagined as they helped Duke settle onto his bed in the living room, was that Eleanor Jenkins had given them far more than Duke's life and future security. She had given them a revelation that would transform their understanding of everything that had happened since that rainy day on a Tennessee back road, a revelation that would finally bring peace to Sarah's tormented spirit and give meaning to the senseless tragedy that had claimed Melissa's life. Duke's recovery at home progressed steadily over the following weeks. The Thompson family established a new routine centered around his care: medication schedules, gentle exercise sessions, follow-up veterinary appointments. Sarah rarely left his side, even sleeping on a mattress beside his bed during the first few nights to monitor his breathing and comfort him when nightmares disturbed his sleep. "You're spoiling that dog rotten," Robert observed one morning. Though the affection in his voice belied any actual criticism, he was preparing for work, dressed in the uniform of his new position at Davidson Manufacturing. "He deserves it," Sarah replied, carefully measuring Duke's morning medications into his food bowl. "Besides, Dr. Patel said his progress is remarkable. She thinks we can start slightly longer walks next week." Martha joined them in the kitchen, already in her nursing scrubs for her shift at the clinic. "Duke's progress isn't the only remarkable thing around here," she said, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You haven't had a nightmare in almost 2 weeks." Sarah hadn't realized her mother knew about the nightmares that had plagued her since the accident. The screeching tires, shattering glass, Melissa's final scream. She had tried to keep quiet during those terrible moments of waking, not wanting to burden her parents further. But mothers always knew. "Duke helps," she said simply. "When I start to have one, he somehow senses it and wakes me. Just having him there makes everything less terrifying." Robert and Martha exchanged a glance filled with gratitude and wonder. The transformation in their daughter over the past month had been nothing short of miraculous. The withdrawn, haunted girl who moved through life like a ghost had been replaced by someone engaged, purposeful, increasingly confident. Duke's influence extended far beyond his protective instincts. He had given Sarah a reason to heal. As her parents left for work, Sarah settled into the living room with Duke for their morning routine. Following Eleanor's detailed instructions, she ran her hands over his body, checking his healing wounds and exercising his limbs to maintain muscle tone during his restricted activity period. Duke submitted to the examination with dignified patience, his intelligent eyes never leaving her face. "You're such a good boy," she praised, rewarding him with a gentle scratch behind the ears. "Eleanor would be so proud of your progress." At the mention of Eleanor's name, Duke's ears perked up. It had been 3 weeks since they'd said goodbye at the veterinary clinic, and though Sarah had called the cabin twice to provide updates on Duke's recovery, she'd only reached Eleanor's answering machine. The older woman had not returned the calls, and Sarah tried to ignore the worry gnawing at her. Perhaps Eleanor simply needed space to process her own complex emotions about Duke's new life. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Duke immediately stood, alert but not alarmed, his posture suggesting curiosity rather than concern. Sarah checked the security camera on her phone, a precaution her parents had insisted on after the snake incident, and was surprised to see Colonel Hendricks on their porch, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. "Colonel Hendricks," she greeted him after opening the door. "This is unexpected." The colonel smiled, his weathered face creasing with warmth. "Good morning, Sarah. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to check on Duke's progress personally." He nodded toward the shepherd, who had positioned himself beside Sarah. "And I see he's doing remarkably well." "Please, come in," Sarah offered, stepping aside. "My parents are at work, but they should be home later if you needed to speak with them." "Actually," Colonel Hendricks said as he entered the living room, "it's you I wanted to talk to if you have a few minutes." Something in his tone, a careful neutrality that suggested he was choosing his words with precision, alerted Sarah that this wasn't merely a social call. "Of course. Can I get you some coffee or water?" "Water would be fine, thank you." As Sarah went to the kitchen, she heard the colonel greet Duke quietly. When she returned, she found the shepherd sitting at perfect attention before the colonel, who had knelt to examine the healing wound on Duke's face. "His recovery is impressive," Colonel Hendricks observed, accepting the water glass. "Military working dogs are bred for resilience, but even by those standards, Duke is exceptional." "Eleanor says he's too stubborn to give up," Sarah replied, settling on the couch. At Eleanor's name, the colonel's expression shifted subtly. "Yes, Eleanor Jenkins is quite familiar with that particular quality in Duke. It's one he shared with his handler, Captain Michael Jenkins." Sarah nodded, having heard bits and pieces about Michael from Eleanor during their time at the cabin. "She doesn't talk about her son much, but I could tell they were very close." Colonel Hendricks took a measured sip of water before responding. "Michael Jenkins was one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to serve with. His death during that training exercise was a significant loss to the program." There was something in his tone, a hesitation perhaps, that caught Sarah's attention. "Colonel, is everything okay? Is there something wrong with Duke's paperwork or benefits?" "No, nothing like that," he assured her quickly. "Duke's retirement and benefits are all in order." "I'm here about something else entirely." He set down his glass and reached into his jacket, removing an envelope. "Eleanor asked me to deliver this to you." Sarah accepted the envelope with a growing sense of unease. Why wouldn't she just call? Or mail it herself? The colonel's expression softened with compassion. "I think her letter will explain better than I could." With suddenly trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, precise yet flowing, much like the woman herself. "My dear Sarah, by the time you receive this letter, I will have returned to my mountain home for the last time. The doctors have given me 3 months at most. The cancer has spread too far for treatment to be effective. I've chosen to spend my remaining days in the place I love, surrounded by the memories of my life's work and my beloved son. I didn't tell you about my condition because I didn't want it to overshadow Duke's recovery or your own healing journey. Some burdens are not meant to be shared. There is, however, something I must share with you now, something I've carried alone for too long. The night of your accident, the night you lost Melissa, was not the random tragedy you believe it to be. The driver who ran the red light and struck your car was my son, Michael. Sarah gasped, the letter trembling in her hands. She looked up at Colonel Hendricks, who nodded solemnly in confirmation. "Keep reading," he encouraged gently. Michael was suffering from severe PTSD following his final deployment. Despite Duke's extraordinary ability to help manage his symptoms, that night Michael experienced a flashback while driving. He believed he was back in a combat zone, evading enemy fire. By the time Duke could alert him to reality, it was too late. The collision had occurred. Michael survived the initial crash, but suffered catastrophic injuries. In his final conscious moments at the hospital, he learned that a young girl had died while her friend survived. This knowledge broke something in him that could not be repaired. He died 3 days later, having never regained full consciousness. Duke was with Michael in the car that night. He too was injured in the crash, though not severely. After Michael's death, Duke was to be retired to my care, but he disappeared from the base kennels the night after the funeral. I always believed he was searching for Michael, unable to comprehend that his handler was truly gone. When you found Duke on that rural road near my cabin, it was no coincidence, Sarah. Of all the roads in Tennessee, all the possible places he could have wandered in his injured state, he was found by the very person whose life had been irreversibly entangled with his through that tragic night. Some might call this coincidence. I call it something else, something my scientific training resists, but my heart embraces fully. Purpose. Duke found you because he was meant to find you. Two souls wounded by the same tragedy, both carrying survivor's guilt, both needing healing that only the other could provide. I didn't tell you this truth at first because I feared it would reopen your wounds rather than heal them. Later, I recognized that the bond forming between you and Duke was so profound, so necessary for both of you, that introducing this painful connection might disrupt the healing process. Now, as I face my own ending, I cannot leave this world with this truth untold. You deserve to know the full circle of your journey with Duke, not just the part that began on that rainy afternoon when your family found him, but the deeper connection that began the night of the accident. Please forgive me for not telling you sooner. And please know this, Michael would be profoundly grateful that Duke found his way to you, that some small good has come from that terrible night. Duke has fulfilled his purpose in finding you, protecting you, and helping you heal. Now you must fulfill yours by living the full and meaningful life that Melissa cannot. Not with guilt, but with gratitude for each day, with deep affection and hope for your future. Eleanor Jenkins, P.S. Colonel Hendricks was Michael's commanding officer and has been my friend for many years. He knows everything and has my permission to answer any questions this letter raises. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the implications of Eleanor's words sank in. Duke, her Duke, had been in the car that killed Melissa. His handler, Eleanor's son, had been the driver whose actions had shattered her world. "It's true?" she finally managed to ask Colonel Hendricks, her voice barely audible. He nodded solemnly. "Every word." I was at the hospital when Michael was brought in. Duke wouldn't leave his side. The medical staff had to make special arrangements to allow him in the ICU. After Michael passed, Duke fell into a depression that concerned our veterinary staff. Then, the night after the funeral, he somehow escaped the kennels. Despite an extensive search, he was never found. Sarah looked at Duke, who had moved to rest his head on her knee, his soulful brown eyes fixed on her face with the unwavering loyalty she had come to depend on, the same eyes that had witnessed the accident from the other vehicle, that had seen Melissa die while she survived. "Does he know?" she whispered, the question sounding absurd even as she asked it. "Does he recognize me from that night?" Colonel Hendricks considered the question with surprising seriousness. Duke was trained to remember faces, scents, locations. It was part of his military role. "Is it possible he recognized you on some level?" "Our canine behaviorists would say yes. Whether he made the connection to the accident," he shook his head, "that enters a realm beyond scientific certainty." "And Eleanor? How long has she known about me, about my connection to Michael's accident?" "Since the day you brought Duke to her cabin," the colonel replied. "Your name appeared in the accident report, which Eleanor had read countless times. She recognized it immediately." Sarah tried to process this revelation, her mind swirling with questions. Why didn't she tell me? Why help us at all, knowing who I was? Eleanor lost everything that mattered to her that night, her only child and then Duke. Finding him again, seeing the bond forming between you two, she saw it as Michael's legacy, a way for something healing to emerge from tragedy. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as the full weight of Eleanor's compassion settled over her. Instead of bitterness or blame, Eleanor had offered only kindness and guidance. She had given Sarah the very dog who had witnessed Melissa's death, trusting that this unlikely connection would bring healing rather than more pain. "She's really dying?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Colonel Hendricks nodded gravely. "The cancer was already advanced when you met her. The doctors had given her 6 months at most. She's refused aggressive treatment, preferring quality of life over quantity. And she's alone up there in that cabin?" The thought was unbearable. "We should go to her. She shouldn't be alone." "Eleanor has made her wishes very clear," the colonel said gently. "She's a deeply private person who wants to face this final journey on her own terms, in her own space. But after everything she's done for us, for me and Duke, the best way to honor Eleanor is to do exactly what she asks in her letter. Live fully, without guilt." Sarah sat in silence, one hand resting on Duke's head as she tried to absorb the staggering revelations. The dog who had saved her life, who had begun to heal her broken spirit, had been inextricably linked to the very tragedy that had shattered her world. It seemed impossible beyond coincidence. "What happens now?" she finally asked, looking up at Colonel Hendricks. "That depends on you," he replied. "Some might find this connection too painful to bear. If that's the case for you, arrangements could be made for Duke's care elsewhere." The suggestion sent a jolt of panic through Sarah. "No, Duke stays with me." The fierceness of her response surprised even her. Whatever happened that night, it wasn't Duke's fault. And it wasn't mine either. For the first time since the accident, Sarah heard herself say those words and truly believe them. It wasn't her fault. The realization broke something open inside her, a dam holding back emotions she had suppressed for too long. "Would you like me to stay until your parents return?" Colonel Hendricks offered, clearly concerned about leaving her alone after such revelations. Sarah shook her head. "No, thank you. I need some time to process this. And I'm not alone." She glanced down at Duke, who hadn't moved from her side. "I have the best companion possible for difficult moments." After the colonel departed, promising to be available if she had more questions, Sarah sank to the floor beside Duke's bed. The shepherd shifted to accommodate her, his solid warmth pressing against her side in silent support. "You were there," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. "You saw it all. And somehow, out of all the possibilities in the world, you found your way to me." Duke's response was to rest his head on her shoulder, a gesture so full of understanding and acceptance that fresh tears came to Sarah's eyes. Eleanor was right, she continued, talking to Duke as she had come to do during their most private moments. This isn't coincidence. This is redemption. When Robert and Martha returned home that evening, they found Sarah sitting on the porch swing with Duke beside her, watching the sunset. The letter lay folded in her lap, and her eyes held a peace they hadn't seen since before the accident. "Sarah, what is it?" Martha asked, immediately sensing something significant had happened. With steady hands, Sarah gave them Eleanor's letter. She watched their expressions change as they read: shock, disbelief, and finally a quiet understanding that mirrored her own emotional journey of the past hours. "Oh, Sarah," Martha whispered when she finished reading. I don't even know what to say." Robert sat heavily on the step, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. "All this time you and Duke were connected in ways we never imagined." "I know it sounds crazy," Sarah said, "but it feels right somehow, like the universe was trying to bring healing out of tragedy." "It's not crazy at all," Robert assured her, his voice thick with emotion. "Some things defy logical explanation but make perfect sense to the heart." Martha joined Sarah on the swing, taking her hand. "What do you want to do about Eleanor? Should we try to visit her? To thank her properly before—" She couldn't complete the sentence. Sarah looked out at the darkening sky, thinking of the silver-haired woman in her mountain cabin, facing her final days with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout their brief acquaintance. "I think we should respect her wishes," she decided. "But I'm going to write to her, to tell her that I understand now, and that I'm grateful. Not just for Duke, but for the truth." That night, as the Thompson family talked late into the evening, something shifted in their collective healing. The revelation about Duke's connection to the accident that had nearly destroyed them didn't reopen old wounds as might have been feared. Instead, it brought a strange sense of completion, a feeling that the random cruelty of that night had been balanced, however slightly, by the profound bond that had formed between Sarah and Duke. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood before a small gathering at Nashville's Veterans Memorial Park. Duke sat perfectly at attention beside her, his service vest adorned with both his military medals and newer certifications identifying him as a registered therapy dog. His face showed barely any traces of the snake bite that had nearly taken his life, only a small area of lighter fur marked where the wound had been. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming today," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the crowd. "The opening of the Eleanor Jenkins Memorial Garden for military working dogs represents something very special, not just to me and Duke, but to all the handlers and dogs who have served our country." In the front row, Robert and Martha watched with evident pride. Behind them sat Colonel Hendricks and several other military personnel, along with a group of veterans accompanied by their service dogs. Duke's graduation from his therapy dog training program 6 months earlier had connected the Thompson family to Nashville's veteran community in ways they never could have anticipated. "Eleanor Jenkins dedicated her life to the care and training of military working dogs," Sarah continued. "As a lieutenant colonel in the Army Veterinary Corps, she pioneered treatments that saved countless canine lives in combat zones. But her legacy extends beyond her military service." Sarah glanced down at Duke, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Eleanor taught me that healing often comes from unexpected places, that purpose can emerge from our deepest wounds, and that the connections between humans and animals can transcend explanation." Eleanor had passed away peacefully in her mountain cabin 8 months earlier. In accordance with her wishes, she had been buried beside her son, with full military honors. Among her personal effects had been detailed plans for a memorial garden dedicated to military working dogs, along with a substantial bequest to fund its creation. Sarah had embraced the project wholeheartedly, working with Colonel Hendricks and the Veterans Administration to secure the perfect location. Now, as she prepared to cut the ribbon on the completed garden, she felt Eleanor's presence as strongly as if the older woman were standing beside her. Duke and I visit local schools to teach children about the important work of military dogs, Sarah explained to the audience. We also volunteer at the VA hospital where Duke seems to instinctively know which veterans need his special attention. The shepherd's ears perked up at the mention of his name, causing a ripple of appreciative laughter through the crowd. Duke came into my life during my darkest time, Sarah continued, no longer afraid to acknowledge her struggles publicly. After losing my best friend in a car accident, I was lost in grief and guilt. Duke, who had experienced his own traumas and losses, somehow found his way to me. Together, we discovered a path toward healing that neither of us could have found alone. She didn't share the full truth of their connection. That remained a private knowledge shared only with family and closest friends. But the essence of their journey together, the remarkable bond that had formed between a wounded girl and a wounded warrior, was evident to anyone who saw them together. This garden will serve as a place of reflection and gratitude, Sarah concluded. A reminder of the service and sacrifice of military working dogs and their handlers, and a testament to Eleanor Jenkins' belief that even our deepest wounds can lead us to our greatest purpose. As Sarah cut the ribbon, officially opening the garden to the public, Duke stood tall beside her, every inch the distinguished military veteran, yet also unmistakably her companion, her protector, her friend. The path that wound through the carefully designed space featured benches, informational plaques about famous military dogs throughout history, and a central fountain where children could sit and learn about the special bond between handlers and their canine partners. Later, as visitors explored the garden, Martha joined Sarah near a quiet corner, where a bronze plaque bore Eleanor's name and military rank, along with a quote she had often repeated: "Healing is rarely a straight path forward. Sometimes we must go back to move ahead." "She would have loved this," Martha said, slipping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "All of it, but especially seeing you now, so strong, so purposeful." Sarah nodded, emotion tightening her throat. In just over a month, she would begin classes at Vanderbilt University, studying veterinary medicine with a focus on trauma care and rehabilitation, a path inspired by both Eleanor and Duke. The shepherd would accompany her to classes as her officially registered service animal, continuing the journey they had begun together on that rainy afternoon in Tennessee. "I still miss Melissa every day," Sarah admitted quietly. "But it's different now. I'm living for both of us, just like Eleanor wanted." Duke pressed against her leg, offering his silent support as he always did when emotions ran high. His brown eyes, which had seen both the worst and best of humanity, held the wisdom and patience that had become Sarah's anchor through the continuing process of healing. As the autumn sunlight filtered through the changing leaves, casting dappled shadows across the memorial garden, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey that had begun in tragedy had led her here, to purpose, to meaning, to a life focused not on what she had lost, but on what she could give. Duke, sensing her momentary introspection, looked up at her face with unwavering devotion. In his intelligent eyes, Sarah saw reflected all that Eleanor had tried to teach her: that some connections transcend explanation, that healing often comes disguised as something else entirely, and that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. "Come on, boy," she said softly, giving his ear a gentle scratch. "We've got work to do." Together, the girl and her extraordinary dog walked forward into the future they had built from the broken pieces of their past, a future bright with promise, purpose, and the enduring bond between two survivors who had found in each other exactly what they needed most. Life's second acts often arrive in unexpected packages. The Thompson family discovered this truth when they rescued Duke, a wounded German Shepherd, from certain death. What they couldn't know was how this extraordinary dog would rescue them in return, especially 17-year-old Sarah, still haunted by survivor's guilt after losing her best friend. As Duke healed physically, Sarah began healing emotionally. When Duke later risked everything to save Sarah from a deadly copperhead, their bond was sealed in a moment of sacrifice that echoed through both their wounded souls. The revelation that Duke had witnessed the very accident that took Sarah's friend wasn't coincidence but purpose. Two survivors finding each other across impossible odds. Their journey reminds us that healing rarely follows a straight path. Sometimes we must revisit our deepest wounds to truly move forward. It's never too late for redemption, for finding new purpose, for allowing love to transform grief into gratitude. Have you ever experienced an unexpected second chance that changed everything, or found healing through the unconditional love of an animal companion? Share your story in the comments. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.